Hi there. Hello, and welcome to Direct Access MixStream episode 1, the very first in this series that I've started doing. So let me introduce myself. My name's JD. I am a guitarist. I'm also a producer and engineer, and owner of Studio 2105, which I am here today. I'm also the guitarist for Pop Shove It, but that's a story for another time, okay? All right, so welcome to everyone who's tuning in and watching this live stream, whether you're from Malaysia or Philippines or anywhere else in this world. Please let me know if you guys can hear the audio. If there are any issues with the video feed or the audio feed, I do apologize in advance. All right. But do let me know in the comments in the chat. Okay. First of all, I want to give a very big shout out to the very first patrons. All right. A big shout out, big thank you to first of all Walter, Mark Fernandez, Angeline Lau, and Zakwan. Thank you for subscribing and becoming a patron. Big shout out and thank you for your support. Okay, I want to make this as interactive as possible. So please do say hi in the chat. Let us know where are you from. Let us know as well. Let me know as well. What do you do? And I'll try my best to either reply in the stream or reply later in the chat. Okay. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, anything that you want to ask, just drop it in the chat section, and I will get back to you one by one. Okay. So very quickly, what's this direct access is about? All right. So it's a program which I'm doing, which, as you can see, we're doing a live stream mixing session of a song. So today's is going to be a little bit special. This episode is going to be a charity live stream. So whatever revenue or income or subscriptions that are coming in from the patrons. So, for example, the patrons I've mentioned earlier, all of the proceeds from this live stream is going to go towards charities in both Malaysia and also the Philippines. Okay, why Malaysia and Philippines? It's because this song, Unshakable, was a song that I co-wrote with Jamir of Slapshock. They're great friends of mine. You know, they're like brothers from another mother, and we're very close. And we wrote this song back in 2013 as a tribute to the survivors of Typhoon Haiyan. But we just reworked it. I and Jamir kind of reworked it. We did a new version. We with slightly different with different instrumentation to dedicate it now to the frontliners who are fighting in the fight against COVID-19. So, where's this charity gonna go to? So, all proceeds in Malaysia. We have I've picked and selected the NGO, Puak Payung. So Puak Payung stands for Persatuan Untuk Anak Kita. They are an NGO that handles and takes care and advocates for underprivileged children, especially young children. So especially at this time when a lot of people are locked down in both our countries, they are helping to provide for the needs of a lot of the families of these young children. So the proceeds are going to go to there. For Philippines, Jamir just called me earlier today. So they what they're going to do with the funds is that they are actually taking an initiative to sponsor the manufacture and distribution of 1,000 pieces of face masks, because in the Philippines it's very hard to obtain a surgical face mask. You know, the government sort of restricts and allocates it for the use of medical staff, you know, the frontline medical personnel. So for the common people, for the ordinary citizens, it's very hard to obtain. So Slapshock is making this effort. So the funds and any kind of proceeds from this live stream is also going to go towards there as well. So how are you going to do this? How are you going to contribute? Go to All right. You can go to, first of all, our Patreon page, patreon.com/studio2105, right? And you can subscribe to become a patron. It's totally voluntary, of obviously, you don't have to if you can't afford it, but if you can, we would really, really appreciate if you can contribute. Now there'll be also a few other methods like PayPal, and you can also make direct online transfers, which if you feel may be more convenient for you. But I'll leave all these methods down in the description. Okay, so in the video description, so you can check it out. The links and everything will be there, and I'll also post it up in the chat as well. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead. So let's start first of all. Okay. All right. Just hang on a second. All right. Got color. Yes, got color. Chris from Eyes and Ears just commented that my arranged screen, DAW screen, has got color. Well, yeah, I do. I do have color. I do color code it now because I used to work in a very, very gray scale. I refer to this color as like very, very tropical. It's a very, very tropical fruit. Makes me hungry now, man. Okay, so without further ado, for those who you were tuning in earlier, you might have heard the original mix of the song, the full band version with all the drums and all the guitar. So this is a much more acoustic version. So what's the first thing that we do in the mixing process? So obviously, before even where we got to, a very, very important process is the prep. Is the prep work. Okay. Maybe I'm going to talk about the prep work first. Let's talk about the songwriting, the songwriting process. So I wrote this song and worked out the arrangements and wrote the chorus melody, right? Back in 2013, and then I shared it with Jamir because so what Jamir came up, he came up with the verses. So we co-wrote the song. So basically, the version that we are doing for 2020, right? The new version that I'm going to show and going to play for you in a moment, right? It's much more acoustic, so it's very based around an acoustic guitar and also a string arrangement. So without further ado, we'll just check it out. So this is a rough mix first. So basically all the balances and all the faders, it's a static mix. There's hardly any automation of that sort yet. So let's just take a quick listen to the track, and whilst it's playing back, I'll try to reply some of the questions in the chat.
Fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain. When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart, let your listen to the sound scuffing through the air. I know you feel alone in this place. The picture on the wall slowly fades away. Memories are gone forever. Silent voices weeping. When we can't move, when the silence swallows you, to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain. When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart,
Okay, cool. So that's just a first initial listen to the entire song, to all the tracks and the rough picks, because it's good to because you want to sort of always have an overall picture of the entire song. What makes a song work? What's the main focus of the mix, be it is it going to be the drums, or is it, or in most cases the vocal. Obviously this song, the vocal is going to be the most important thing. As we say, the expression is vocal is king. So always good to always have an overview, a big picture overview of the entire mix before you go and dive straight into all the nitty gritty details. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is gonna be it's a very acoustic based song. So obviously, where we're gonna start off first is gonna be the acoustic guitars. So when we recorded this, I of course recorded acoustic guitars first. Then I sent all the acoustic, just acoustic guitar parts. I sent it over to Jamir to record his vocals, and then once he was done, he sent his vocals back. Then only once I have the vocals, then only I know what else I should add on top of it. So the string arrangement, all the string parts, all the additional percussion. We have a little shaker going on, right, in the second half of the song, right? That came after the vocals, strings, and all these miscellaneous parts, because it's very important that all the additional parts work to support the melody and support the vocal, and not be there to fight with it. So that's why the process of recording this was done in such a way: acoustic guitar, vocals, then only we added all the string. Then only I added all the string arrangements. Okay, so let's take a look first of all. Right. Let me start maybe by mentioning. I was about to mention as well, prep work, session prep work. Prep work is very, very important. So prior to this mix session, right, all the tracks which have already been which I had recorded, I made sure that firstly, it's what we call topping and tailing. We edit out all the silences. We edit out all the unwanted parts. Um, Same goes with vocals. So all these vocals, as you can see, it's all been edited, and all the silences, whatever the breaths, noises, have all been edited to make sure that whatever that's not wanted, it's been eliminated. And also it helps to ensure a easier workflow, because you can visually see where everything is, where every part, where every track comes in, so you don't waste time trying to look or trying to trace where the different parts are. Now the strings, all right, have obviously been obviously programmed, right? So these were done in MIDI first, and what I've already done is I have already bounced it out as audio, and trimmed it and edited it and cleaned up all the tracks as well. All right, so once again, well, I always like to whatever are MIDI or VST instruments, I would rather just bounce it down to audio, so I can free up all the resources of the computer towards the mix. Okay, so let's start with the guitars. Let's just mute everything else first. Just gonna play the guitar track. All right. So the song starts with an acoustic guitar. Here we go. The second guitar part comes in that just does a strum. So the first one does more of a palm mute pattern. Okay, cool. All right. Then the main rhythm is double track left and right. All right. So a point about I want to make about these guitars is that they've actually, when I was recording them, I already recorded them with some compression on the way in, so this allows me to sort of already kind of shape the dynamics of the acoustic guitar without instead of leaving it to post. I do that very often, so but again, it's up to you. You can always record it dry without any compression. You can always leave the compression for later in the mix, but we will add a little bit of compression as you will see later. Okay, so all right. Another thing maybe I want to go and mention forth is that at every start of every mix session, besides prepping, is very important. It's very, very important to have a template. So I will probably do another video which I will share my template in detail. Right. So stay tuned. I will put up another video which will explain the workflow of the template much more in detail. Or if you want to find out more about it. Okay. But basically, what it means is that I already organized my workflow so that if you can take a look down here in the screen, you can see I have the all the different groups, subgroups all already set up. So in this case here, there's snare, toms, overhead room. Of course, there's no drums in this track, but it's in my preset anyway. It's in my template. So everything goes into different subgroups. Okay, so you can see group faders are all in blue color. So some of them I've already moved them here to make it easier, so it's easier to look at it, right? So I've already grouped all the acoustic guitars, the rhythm acoustic guitars into this group. All the strings are also being sent to the group. Vocal as well, all right? So I always send the vocal to a group, which again I will share. We'll take a closer look at what happens there, right? So same goes. All the effects that I typically use are already all been laid out in the template, right? Whatever common plugins which that I usually call up, a couple of reverbs. I usually have like 2 reverbs, a 2-tap delay, a doubler, and a bunch of different delays here. I got a mono delay, a stereo delay, and I got a long delay, and 1 spare channel, maybe for some miscellaneous effect. So all these effects and whatever commonly used plugins which I'm gonna use are already gonna be there, ready. There's no time wasted, sorting out, going into the plugin menus and going and finding and loading all the plugins. It's all already there. It's all set. All the sends itself themselves have already been assigned as well. Okay, cool. All right, so okay, so big shout out, hey everyone. My band is here. Rudy, AJ, and Uno are all here. So's Chris Pereira all the way from KK. Zakwan, Haslan, and Jennifer Thompson. Hi, thank you for jumping into this live stream. Okay, so I've talked about let's go ahead. I've talked about my template. The next thing I want to share with you is what's on my Masterbuss, because that's probably something you want to know. Okay, now so let's take a look at what's inside my Masterbuss. All right, so the Masterbuss is obviously the main stereo 2-track stereo bus, right, where all the audio, all the different tracks in the end is all summed and into this Masterbuss. So here's what I have going on. Right, so it starts in the first here. This is an Aosis REQ. Right, so this is from Aosis. It comes with the Slate Digital plugins. So basically, this does a little bit of a smiley curve, right? I have it's got the air band up here, very gentle. It's just like a 1 dB, on the air band. There's also an earth band which I don't engage it, but it depending on the song. Sometimes I will, just to give it a little bit more we refer and we call it a little bit of boom, a little bit of fizz. So there is a little bit of earth, low end, and a bit of a high end. I also sometimes will have a very very broad mid range boost here, right? Again, very very subtle. This is like only 1 dB, very very subtle. Sometimes if I feel that the vocal just needs a little bit of lift, or the overall mix just needs a little bit of that presence, sometimes I will just engage this in. But for now, let's bypass this. Let's bypass the earth. I'm just gonna leave the air band on. Okay, all right. So moving on next, what I have here is a Waves C4 multi-band compressor. Okay, what I have it on, basically this is actually the preset, the multi-opto preset, right? So basically what I have, this is a very very gentle multi-band compression. What I do at in the midway of the mix process is I will kind of set it so it just massages the overall mix, very very tiny, very subtle. This is probably maybe half a dB the most, right, on the different frequency bands. So this is just in case some very obnoxious frequency starts popping up. It's kind of there to just gently tuck it in. It's very 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 gentle. Okay, now I have this. You're gonna see this plugin a lot. I'm gonna use this a lot. This is called the TDR Nova. This is what they call a parallel dynamic equalizer. So it's become one of my favorite plugins, right? Because it's not only a basic EQ. It's not just you can treat it like a normal regular EQ. All right, it's got its it's got its high pass filters, its low pass filters, it's got its shelving, it's got its peaking, parametric, it's got the normal parameters that you can associate with any kind of EQ. But it also has what we call also has a dynamic EQ mode. So if we engage this, right, it engages the dynamic EQ. I'll show you and demonstrate how I use it in the mix later, right? So but in the Masterbuss, it kind of just sits there again if I need to use it. But to be honest, in the Masterbuss I hardly use this, so that's why you see it's bypassed. I use it more in the mix. Oh, best of all, by the way, this TDR Nova is entirely free of charge, right? So the plugin company that makes it, it's called the Tokyo Dawn Labs, all right? It's amazing. They provide such a plugin with such amazing functionality. There is a paid version. They call it the Nova, the gentleman's version, all right? So maybe this one is not the gentleman. The free version is not the gentleman version. The gentleman version gives you 6 bands, but this one, the free version, already gives you 4 bands of EQ to work with, which is amazing, which is fantastic. And plus all of this, all right, it also has a parallel mode, so you can always run the EQ in parallel. Okay, cool. Let's move. I'm going to move on, right, to the next part in the next the plugin in the chain, in the master chain. So over here I have let's put it over. It's gone to the other screen. Here we go. There we go. So this is the Slate Digital's virtual bus compressors. So this basically models several very very famous classic compressors. The SSL, the FG Gray is a model of the SSL. The FG Red is the Focusrite red compressor, and the FG Mu is a model of a very very famous variable mu compressor that's out there. Variable mu compressors are, for example, like the Fairchild, like the Manley. Well, the Fairchild is the classic version. They're very very expensive. They can cost as much as a car, right? So okay, so this is my virtual bus compressors. Again, at the moment at the start of the mix, they're not going to be there, but I love running the signal chain through them anyway, because each of them does impart a little bit of color, so I do leave it on, but the threshold, everything is at 0, so there's no gain reduction taking place at the moment. Okay, so very quickly, let's go on to the virtual mix rack. So what I have next here on the virtual mix rack is, let me bring it over to this screen because I am running dual monitors, so let me run it here. So here's again a couple of plugins that I have in the virtual mix rack. So let's start with the custom series, the Lift EQ. So again, this is again similar to what the AOSys is doing. It's doing a very gentle presence boost, very gentle. This is like 0.5 dB. This is we call this the big setting. Again, it's more of the for the low end. Okay, this is a revival. Sometimes I use this. This is like a sonic exciter, so you can sort of bring a little bit of excitement, a little bit of shimmer, a little bit of brightness back into. You can use it either in a mix on a track, or in this case, it's sitting here in the Masterbuss. But most of the time, again, I don't use this. All right, so. Another secret ingredient that I have here, this is a fantastic plugin, all right? It's called the FG Bomber. So it's a combination of a compressor, expander, depending on how you set it, depending on how you drive it. It can either act as a compressor, it acts as a combination of a compressor kind of expander. It just does some sort of a magic behind it. Okay. Right. And then I go here. This is a trimmer. Trimmer is in case I need to sort of trim the overall average volume level. I need to bring it up louder or softer again. So at the moment, it's not doing anything. So to top it off, I'll end it with the virtual mix bus. Right. So what the virtual mix bus is, it's a console emulation plugin. So what we're doing is that because in the digital domain, right, the one thing that we miss a lot is the sort of what we call the analog sound, the analog feel. So what all these console emulations do is they bring back a little bit of that, inject a little bit of that flavor. So we try to replicate how inside a DAW, how the signal path, how it flows, right, going through the circuitry of a classic analog consoles that we love. So what it does here, it has different models. You have the USA, which is an API console, which is my favorite. I love the setting. I love how the API console setting sounds. There's also a Brit 4K. It's an SSL 4000G. Brit 4K is an SSL 4000E. You get an RCA tube, which is an old vintage RCA tube console. This little logo here is a Trident, all right? Console is also another famous, and Brit N is for Neve. But here I pretty much always leave the setting at the USA. Okay. Right. One very important thing is I'm going to be using a lot of the virtual mix bus, and I'll show you later. All right. So one important thing is the noise reduction should be activated. And same thing goes for some of the other plugins as the console and the tape emulation plugins, right? I'm gonna put a lot of I'm gonna make sure that the noise reduction is there, because sometimes when you have a lot of track counts, the noise floor, right, which starts to creep up. So it can, if you have a lot of tracks and you have a lot of instances of the virtual mix bus in your project, the noise floor can creep up, and you get back that you're gonna end up with some noise in the background. So that's VMR. Okay. Very quickly. So there's another here. I have an emo generator, which is tone generated. It's nothing to do with the mix. This is for calibration. So I have it in there because I will do a calibration. Okay. Brainworks saturator. This is just to give, sometimes maybe if a mix needs a little bit more energy, a little bit more saturation, I will engage this. But most of the time, I don't use it not too much, because I'm really getting quite a good deal of the saturation flavor that's coming in from virtual mix rack, the virtual mix bus. And also the very last thing here, right, is the, I'm going to show you here, virtual tape machine, which is, of course, tape emulation, right? Okay, so the settings that I have on the master bus, it would be 30 IPS, okay? The with tape machines, the IPS stands for inches per second, so it's related to the tape speed. So 15 IPS is slower, obviously slower than 30 IPS, right? So the difference between the two is that 30 IPS will have a much more better high frequency response, right? It has a much more higher frequency response, so it extends a little bit higher, right? So there's also different machine types. So there's also 2-inch 16 track, right? Or a half-inch 2-inch track. So in the master bus, I set it to the half-inch 2-inch track because that's usually the tape format that we use for in the Mixdown, right? Tape type is also another thing. There's the FG 456, which refers to Ampex 456, or there's also an FG9, which is if I'm not mistaken, it's the Quantigy GP9. Well, for those who used to work with analog tape and analog consoles, you will remember these brand names, but it's very hard to find now. So they both again have different sounds. So in the master bus setting, I always select the GP9, which again has a slightly wider and much more a wider frequency response compared to the 456. Okay, so here goes. There's one more thing that's sitting down here. It's the BX limiter. Again, I'm not using this because I was just playing around with it, but it's very cool because it's not only just a pure limiter, but it's also a saturator. So I was playing around. Maybe I'll play around with it, and we'll see how it goes. Maybe we'll put it in the end and see how it sounds. Okay, let's go down to the mix itself. Okay, so remember I was talking about trying to emulate the workflow of a analog console to try to bring back that analog flavor into the digital workflow, which we are working here right now. So, okay, so this is what I mean, right? So when we used to work with analog tape and analog consoles, we would record on an analog tape, and then that would go through and mix it down and mix it through an analog console. So what I have, right, how we use all these tape and console emulation plugins is this way. We always insert it as the first insert in the insert chain of every track. So it's has a virtual tape machine, the same one which I showed you on the mix bus. I have this on every track as well. Now, when it comes on the tracks, it's slightly different, the settings, right? So I will sometimes have, in this case, I have this on 30 IPS. But if I want a something which is a little bit warmer, it tames down. If you want to tame the highs down a little bit, you want to make the highs a little bit more subtle, you switch it down to 15 IPS, right? But for in this case, for acoustic guitars, I want to sort of maintain as wide and as full frequency range as possible, so I use 30 IPS. So machine type, again, so we will set it to 2-inch 16 track, and for recording, all right. So this is like we're playing back from a tape machine. Generally speaking, it would probably be from the FG456. So this is what I set this on. So this is the first plugin that's on the insert of every track, right? And then followed by another instance of virtual mix rack. And in this virtual mix rack, we have, first of all, the virtual channel plugin. So early on, we saw we had the virtual mix bus, right? So that one models the mix bus of an analog console. The virtual channel, it models the signal, the characteristics of a channel strip of the analog console. So don't confuse the two. You can mix and match. There's no right or wrong saying that you can't use a you can't use the virtual mix bus in the track. But generally speaking, the way is that we use the virtual channel on tracks, and we use the virtual mix bus on the master bus, on the mix bus itself. Okay, so same thing. All right, it's also models the same 6 consoles which I have here, right? Make sure again noise reduction is on, because again on every instance we want the noise reduction to be down. So the next thing over here is the FG73, right? So this is a emulation of the Neve 1073 preamp. So again, it is trying to emulate how the signal flow works as if we are working on a large format analog console. So we're trying to replicate that sort of signal flow and the workflow in a digital audio workstation. Okay, now let's move on. Let's start with just the acoustic guitar, right? That starts the song, the palm mute part. So again, like I mentioned, right, I've already recorded this with a little bit of compression already, so let's just play with it. Okay, cool. I'm just gonna put a high pass filter at about 100 hertz. All right, cool. Now, to be frank, to be honest, I wouldn't do much more to this track, actually, to this acoustic guitar part. I wouldn't do much more, because to my ears it already sounds great. It already sounds um, pretty amazing, right? So with acoustic guitars, right, um, for me it's one instrument where really the saying that says that it's all in the source, right, where the source is a much more important, has got so much more influence on the outcome, rather than what we do in the mix process or what we do in the post production process. With acoustic guitars especially, if you get an instrument which sounds really really good, which records really well, is really really balanced, and you capture it with a good microphone, very often it's like you don't really need to do much to it already, right? By the way, the guitar that I use is right there at the back. You can take a look at it. Oh no, down this side. All right, okay. Because when I'm looking at the screen on my side, it looks like it's on this side, you see, but it's actually on my left. Okay, cool. So that's the acoustic guitar. This one actually belongs to AJ, so thank you. Right, it's really really beautiful sounding. Acoustic guitar records really really well, and it's pretty balanced. So, and again, as I mentioned, I did record with a little bit of a compression, and I played this really, really evenly, right? So, again, there's not much to do except for a little bit of a high pass filter on this, okay? So, let's play that again. Okay, so there was a little bit of like squeak, like a finger squeak noise. All right. Now, honestly, it really doesn't bother me at all. So sometimes it's kind of cool to always leave these little noises and imperfections, because that's what makes the sound organic. Okay, right, and real, because if everything is like super perfect and super polished, it becomes very very boring. It sounds boring, it sounds lifeless, and it doesn't have character. So but if you ever do come across a situation where you get a lot of these kind of squeaks, a lot of these kind of noises, because sometimes it could be due to the technique, right, the fingering technique, or sometimes it's due to the condition of the strings, or the instrument itself, right? Maybe it's just a very very squeaky acoustic guitar, right? Some acoustic guitars can sound squeaky, right? What I would usually do is you can use a very very useful tool to remove squeaks is actually a de-esser. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull this up. I have the Aosis, right? Same company as the AreaQ, right? The E2 de-esser. So let me just make a little loop over where the squeak is. Okay, here it is. There you go. Let's just loop that. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the E2 de-esser. So as you can actually see, right, this little waterfall display gives you an indication of where that offending squeak frequency is. You can see this little bright white spot here. That's where the squeak is. Okay, so there are several presets, right? Very, very useful. Nothing wrong with using presets. So there's one preset here which is called Guitar Squeaks, Squeak Smoothing. Okay, cool. So let's just play that again, right, and see what it does. All right, so whenever you see the yellow band, the color of the yellow shades, right, that shows that the de-esser is working. Now, I don't want it to work on all this because now what it does is that it is actually acting on all the downstrokes, all right? So I don't want that because that starts to rob the it robs the high frequency, it robs the detail from the acoustic guitar. So let's turn the sensitivity all the way down first. All right. Okay, let's turn it down, and let's also take a look at where the center frequency is. So at the moment, right, it's kind of tuning at about 2K. But remember, we want to sort of target this guy. So this is a pretty it's pretty high actually. So let's zoom it up all the way to, this is about let me see, this is about, it's about 9K. It's got like a little squeak at about 9K. Let's see what it does. Okay, let's bring the sensitivity up. Let's compare it without. So it's still there, but it helps to sort of mildly tuck in the squeak down a little bit. Okay. Let me turn down these auto settings first. Bring it down. Now, honestly, to me, I was not really bothered about the squeak in the first place, so we'll just leave it there first. All right. Very important thing about recording or mixing, right, is what it's a phrase which I learned. It's called set but don't forget, right? So basically what this means is that you set something, you set it there, right? And then you move on, right? You move on to the next element, but don't forget what you have done and what you have applied to it, right? So you set it, but don't forget. You move on and then and proceed to see how it goes, because to me it's not really doing that much, so I'll just kind of leave it here for now. Maybe I'll take it out at the end of the mix. Okay, right. So that's for this part. Okay, so again, no compression, just very simple EQ, 100 pass, 100 kilo, high pass filter at about 100 hertz. So the next track that goes below it is a strumming part, right, which strums on every downbeat of each chord. So let's take a listen. Same thing. I feel like it really doesn't need any EQ at all right, apart from just a high pass filter. So this one, I have this high pass a little bit higher, right, at about 180, right? So basically at about 200 it starts to roll off at about 200 onwards. Okay, so for this one there's also a little bit of a let's add a little bit of a reverb to it. So the reverb which I have used, right, is called Lustrous Plates by Liquid Sonics. Okay, so these have different models of different plate reverbs, as the name implies, right? Different types of characteristics, different shades and colors of plate reverbs, right? So what I've chosen here is pretty long reverb time. Actually, it's about almost 3 seconds. But sometimes you see the reverb time. Sometimes you have to set it a little bit longer than the supposedly. If you can always calculate the reverb time based on the tempo. So there is a calculation behind it. You can set a reverb time. But very often, because we calculate reverb time by what we call RT60, all right? So by the time the tail sort of decays all the way to the end, sometimes you can't really hear it. So you have to set the reverb time maybe slightly longer. Okay, but very important thing is the EQ, all right? So it's very, very important to EQ your reverb. So let me take a look, all right? So you can, because first of all, with reverbs, it can be very dangerous if you have a lot of low frequency build up. Right? So if you add too much reverb what happens is that when you have too much low frequency on reverb, it becomes a very, very muddy, mushy mess. Same goes with the high end as well. All right, you don't want your mix to sound very spitty, that usually comes from reverb. All right, so you can always apply a low cut here. So I would kind of go for, let's say, maybe around 200. That's 2,200. Okay, and then have a high cut at about, usually 10K. Right. So I really don't need, on my reverb all the frequencies which are below 200 and above 10K. Okay, so I can always do it here, but I can also apply this in the FX channel itself. So as you can see, I already actually have this EQ applied here. So that's why I don't really need to have this in the plugin. So I can demonstrate to you. So you can always do it if your plugin has the option, has the controls to EQ the reverb. You can do it there. Otherwise, on your effects channel, you can also do it and do the EQ here as well, right? So since this is already done here, like same 210K, I don't really need to do this on the plugin. Okay, all right. This is just to demonstrate what I mean by EQing the reverb. All right. So let's move on to the next part. So the main rhythm guitar, right, is gonna come in, right? So here we go. Let me just play that. All right. Again, I feel that there really isn't much that needs to be done. Okay, except for maybe again another high pass. And okay, but for this instance, because this is a much more aggressive, much more harder, it's played a lot more harder, it's played a lot more aggressively, right? So this one, it will need a little bit of compression, right? So now what I do is that because since this is actually a double track guitar, right? It makes sense, all right? It's okay. So one is pan hard left, which one is pan hard right. So what I do is that this has actually been bussed and sent to a group channel here. So on this group channel, the acoustic guitar group channel, I'm going to pull it up right now, so you can see right here what I've got. Okay, so um, it makes sense, all right? If you are gonna be, let's say, treating or processing a bunch of similar instruments, right? Let's say acoustic guitar, right, or let's say electric guitar, to send them all to a group and do all your processing in that group itself. Instead of putting an instance of, I could also, there's nothing wrong, I could always put the compressor, put the additional EQ here on this track, and then do the same thing for the next track. But it takes it's a little bit less efficient because you are going to be using a lot more of your computer resources. Again, there's no right, there's no wrong, but to keep things simple, right? In this instance, since both of these are similar sounding parts, I would just bus them and send them to a group and do all my processing in the group channel there. So, few things to take note. All right. Again, I mentioned as well, we're trying to duplicate and try to recreate an workflow of an analog console. So let's say on an analog console, I've sent all the acoustic guitars to a subgroup. In this case here, the group, right? So I am also putting here also an instance of the virtual mix bus. Same thing. Noise reduction is on the same channel setting. Again, you can always mix and match. It's not necessarily a must that you have to use it. But for me, I prefer the USA, the API setting, because to me, it's kind of the cleanest sounding one. Okay, cool. All right. Thanks. I see that you've got a lot of comments in the chat. Okay. I'll try and get to that, and I will definitely reply those comments personally, one by one, later on. Okay, cool. So let me play for you again the acoustic guitar part. Okay, so since it's played a little bit harder, obviously the guitar in this case is going to be slightly boomier as well. So this is where TDR comes into play. So I showed you earlier, I have the TDR Nova on my master, but most of the time where I usually apply Nova, all right, it's inside tracks. It's inside tracks, or inside, in this case, a group bus. So let me just bypass what I've got going on here. Okay, so here I've got a high pass filter at about 60 hertz with quite a gentle slope. It's a 12 dB per octave. So when depending on the slope, all right, when the cutoff frequency is 63 hertz, right, it does not necessarily mean that it only starts acting, right, below 63 hertz. So that's not what it means, right? So the cutoff point, all right, where it starts to act even as high as 100, you can see here, right, the slope of the high pass filter, you are already kind of rolling off the lows a little bit gentler. So even up to 100, maybe about here, this is about let's say this is about 100, 150, you already have a slight roll off as well. Okay, so depending on the slope, right, you can obviously have a gentler slope, right, 6 dB per octave. So it starts to, the range where it starts to act is even higher right now. So that's why you set these high pass filters by ear. Okay, now a 24 dB per octave is going to be much more steeper, right? But this is if you want something a little bit more drastic, all right? If you want that high pass filter to be a little bit more, how to say, more prominent. Okay. Now 72 dB is gonna be like a sharp drop off, right? But you have to be very careful with very very high slope values, right? Because what it can result sometimes is you can actually get a resonant ring. I'll go into that and explain that sort of thing in future videos, because to explain what all these resonances are, right, will take a long time, but it'll take a whole other video to try to explain this. So 12 dB per octave is a really good middle point. It's gentle, right? It helps you to roll off whatever frequencies. So let's just play around with it, right? So let's see. Let me switch off the other bands first. Let's just play around with it. So I go up to 200. I'm obviously, I'm really losing a lot of the body. I'm losing all the low end, the energy of the guitar. So a good way to sort of know how to set your high pass filters is to do what I'm going to show you what I'm doing right now, right? So I'm going to pull the cutoff frequency to a little higher, to the point where you really know you are losing all that low end frequency. You're losing the body, you're losing the energy. Then you slowly sort of bring it back in to the point where you get that low end energy back in the track again, right? So here we go. So obviously too much. Yep. Right. So I'm pretty happy with the about 60 to about 70 hertz, right? So in the context, this is a more of an acoustic track. It's a lot more sparse, right? So there's no drums, there's no bass guitar that's sort of competing with it. So in this instance, right, my cutoff frequency is kind of little much more lower than usual, because I'm allowing a lot more of the bottom end that's coming from the acoustic guitar to fill in the mix. If it's a track with, let's say, drums, with bass guitar, with electric guitar, and it's a lot more parts and much more denser, right? I'll probably roll this off to at least about 100, maybe 120, 150, or even higher, depending on the track lah. Okay, so in this case, let's set it about 72. So a little bit of stuff that's going on. So let's listen to it. All right, I'm going to show you what else I've been doing on the EQ. Okay, all right. So here's a couple of things. What I'm hearing is that, first of all, there is a little bit of low end resonance, certain excessive resonance on some notes, right? Especially on the lower notes, you get a bit of a boominess there going on. There's also some on guitars especially, right? The strings will have sometimes some odd harmonic resonances on the top. It depends on the type of string. It depends on the type of strings that is being used as well. So let me show you what it is first of all. Okay, so the first one would be the low end resonance. All right, so let's check it out. Okay, here we go. All right, hang on a second. I sort of lost the audio there for a short while for some weird reason. Okay, I'm going to solo what I mean by the low end resonance, right? So this is the frequency. It's about 178, about 180 hertz. This frequency, so when I was playing it and when I was listening back, that frequency was kind of bothering me, right? So this is where the function of the dynamic EQ, the dynamic EQ mode of a TDR Nova comes in, right? So let's say if I switch this off, right, if I switch this off, I could always treat this like a normal EQ, right? So let me just play it. All right. Okay, so this also does the job as well. All right, so it also kind of it also does a similar job. It helps to sort of cut out that little resonance there at about 180 hertz. But the thing with a regular EQ is this: that once you set and once the EQ is set there, all right, it acts on everything. So it affects everything, even though the offending frequency isn't there, right? You are still sort of cutting the frequency around that area. So sometimes this can negatively affect the sound, right? So to sort of counter that, that's where dynamic EQs are very, very powerful, because what it does, so right. So first of all, let me just turn off the gain reduction on here first, right? So back to 0 dB and switch on the dynamic EQ mode, right? So what I've done is very, very gentle, all right? So basically what the dynamic EQ is, it's a frequency sensitive compressor. It's a frequency specific compressor, right? So what you can do is we've dialed in this compressor that the side chain, right, it will only react, all right, at frequencies at around this range, and when it exceeds a certain threshold. So when, let's say, this sound, in this case this resonance, this boomy little frequency at about 180 hertz starts jumping out in the mix, so what it does is that it will just turn down and tuck down that frequency only when it happens, and it leaves everything else unaffected, right? So I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so you can see it only acts when the frequency kind of pokes out, right, and helps to tuck it down. So again, very what I said in the for the dynamic EQ is very gentle. It's a 2-to-1 ratio. Attack is, I think these were the default settings. I think 10 milliseconds and 180. Sometimes I will tweak this depending on what sort of source. But but this is pretty transparent, so it kind of allows some of the transient through. Okay, so right, so you can take a look, see what it does. Let's turn it without. Right, so it's very subtle. Again, the guitar, right, that I used was really, really, really good sounding already, right? So there's not a lot of issues. This is just kind of just to sort of massage and sort of just to sort of very, very gently sculpt a little bit of the frequencies that jump out, right? So let's have that on there. Okay, cool. So to me, the frequency is still there, so the resonance is still there, but it doesn't jump out, right? It doesn't jump out. It doesn't become an offending frequency that jumps out. So it's still there. It's a very, very transparent way of controlling, of EQing a particular sound source. Okay, now I mentioned there's also a high-end, there's like a high-mid kind of a ringing frequency, right? So let me solo that for you. This one is here, right? You get a little bit of a honky. Okay, let's listen to the entire thing. So this frequency, it's a bit of a honkiness to it. All right. So again, similarly, all right, in this case, I've set it to a slightly higher ratio, 3.1, much faster attack and a faster release. right? Because I want this to act as fast as possible, but at the moment where the frequency disappears, I want the dynamic EQ to sort of let it go, all right? It sort of let it go as quickly as possible, so it doesn't, the effect of the dynamic EQ doesn't linger on too long, because when it does, again, you don't want to start robbing, robbing the sound, robbing the tone, affecting the tone in a negative way. You don't want to find a solution to a problem. You don't want to be solving the problem, one certain problem, but then you in the end up causing another problem instead. So that's where dynamic EQs are very, very, very powerful. Okay, cool. I think I have one more frequency here. Let me just check it out. Yeah, that's right. So there's also another one. Yeah, this little frequency as well. Kind of pokes out. This is a lot more subtle though, so it's hardly doing anything, right? So I have these three on and one more. Yeah, actually, one more. Let's take a listen to this. Right, okay. Yep, so this one is doing a lot more, okay? So let's take a listen to how it works, how everything works in context. So I'll bypass it. So you can see when it's bypassed, you have that ringing, ting, 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 ringing sound there, and you sort of a little bit of that 180 boominess that kind of pokes out. So this helps to sort of keep that all in control. It's still there, but it doesn't like jump out to your ears. Okay. Here we go. Let's play it. Now, a point about these ringing things, all right? So, as I mentioned, sometimes it's dependent on the type of strings, and unfortunately, nowadays it's very, very popular to the coated strings, right? All these the polymer coated strings. Now, in my opinion, all right, the biggest offender is that that the cause of all these weird ringing frequencies are actually the coded strings. This kind of I usually don't really find that this issue. Now this is very a mild example, all right, of what those ringing frequencies are. But I've mixed and I've gotten sometimes tracks or a musician guitarist has brought in acoustic guitar which which was strung with the all these the coated strings, right? Somehow the coating even it does help to preserve the string life. It helps to preserve the brightness, but the sort of negative result is that it generates some weird harmonics. But that's my personal opinion, right? In the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. In the end, the song is what's important. The performance and the lyric is what's important. Okay, right, cool. So let's go on to the next part. So I have, right. So that's the EQ. I also have a compressor here, right? A bit of compression. So this is the LA2A, right? It's an opto compressor which I really really love using on acoustic guitars. All right. If I want something a little bit more aggressive, I'll either maybe use an LA2, LA3, or sometimes 1176. But for me, LA2A is my favorite on acoustic guitar. So just gonna apply it. Super super simple. All right. Controls. You just have your peak reduction and your gain, and that's it. Right. So all right. So it's just there to tuck in and to just to sort of tuck the guitar in so it doesn't poke out, it doesn't jump out too much in volume. Just a little bit to sort of control the dynamics, because the main rhythm section is much more aggressive, right? It's played much more aggressively. All right. Very simple there, actually. Let's play it before with. Okay. Without. This is bypass. Let me match up the gain a bit. Again, LE2As are very, very transparent, right? So I'm kind of averaging between 2 to 3 dB of gain reduction, right? But LE2As are very, very, it's beautiful sounding on acoustic guitars. Okay, so, all right. Let's move on to the EQ. So again, it's sending to the same EQ that I have earlier on. Okay, so this is with the reverb. Okay, cool. Let's move on. So this part comes back in. We turn on the reverb on that again. Okay, cool. All right, so that's pretty much it for the acoustic guitars. All right, so there's another part which comes in the second verse. All right, the more heavier verse, so to speak. So there's another part which plays down here. So it's coming in here. Let me just solo it so that you guys can sort of hear what it's doing. This is actually like the in the actual song, that's where the guitar riff is playing, the main rhythm guitar is playing the riff that's underneath the verse. So let me just solo it. Okay, right. What I'm going to do is probably this will need to high pass it a little bit more. Let's listen to all the rhythm guitars in context, acoustic guitars. Okay, again, as I mentioned, right, since these are all similar elements, right, instead of like applying the processing on all the separate tracks, these are all being sent to the acoustic guitar group as well. All right, so here we go. Cool. Very, very simple, actually. All right. So nothing super complicated, right? Just a little bit of EQ, dynamic EQ, and a little bit of compression. Okay. So moving on to the next part. All right. I'm going to look at the solo very, very quickly. Right. So the solo section. It was actually I took the main theme of the original solo in the original song, and sort of reworked it and paraphrased it a little bit so that it would translate a little bit better. Because in the full version, the full track, right, it's much more, it's a little bit more shreddy, it's a little bit more technical. You got a little bit of like fast runs and arpeggios and stuff like that, but that doesn't translate very well to an acoustic situation. Okay, it sounds really weird if you were to try to shred on an acoustic guitar, right? So it's a little bit more simplified. I'm gonna just play it first, okay, so you can take a listen to it. Okay, so same thing with the virtual tape machine and the virtual mix rack. The console, collection is down there as well. Okay, here we go. All right. Okay. Cool. Right. So there's a little bit more things going on here, right? And I'm going to show you. Okay. Right. Okay. So for this, besides the same similar signal path that I had, right, the virtual channel and also the FG73, I also inserted a custom series EQ, right? So this custom series EQ is kind of like Slate Digital's version of a Pultec, all right? Like it's kind of similar to that. I have a little bit of high frequency boost at about 12K, right? Very, 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 very subtle, 1.2 dB. Mid-range boost at about 2.5. Nothing in the low mids and the low frequency. And similarly, now in this case, the high pass filter that I've set, right, is going up to 160 hertz, because these are all solo parts. These are all lead parts, but usually towards the middle and the higher end range. I don't really need all the low end. The low end's really not necessary there. You see? Okay. So that's why I have this in this case, the high pass filter right up to about 160 hertz. Okay, cool. Now with solo and lead lines, especially on an acoustic guitar, right? Acoustic guitar is a very dynamic instrument because depending on firstly which notes you play, what register, what range, right? The volume of the guitar, can vary very greatly, right? So of course it also depends on the quality of the build of the guitar, all right? So some guitars automatically kind of compress themselves really, really well. Some guitars, if it's maybe not so much more budget, not so high end guitars, sometimes on some strings or some places you will play like, the volume kind of drops. Then sometimes you have some dead notes, or sometimes some notes will tend to jump out or boom. So it very, very, very with acoustic guitars, it's very, very case dependent. It's very dependent on the very specific instrument you're working with and you're recording and you're mixing with. In my experience, brand really does with acoustic guitars. Brand really doesn't matter. It could be a very, very high end. It could be a very expensive, well-known brand guitar, and you can put it next to something that's really, really cheap, a made in China guitar, and some of them are pretty amazing nowadays. And the cheaper guitar can sometimes outperform and sound a lot better in the mix than a guitar that costs way, way, way much more. See, so in this case, the guitar that I use, right, it's an inexpensive model. It's not like a super expensive high end guitar. Okay, let's check it out again. All right. So, and let me know, and I'll let you know what I'm sort of hearing. Okay, cool. So, because the solo kind of transitions between some single notes, pick notes, right? In the lower register, then it transitions to like octaves that's starting from the very very top. It's like from the 12th fret all the way down to the first fret. Okay, and then it goes all the way back again to single note lines, which are like all the way up to the 12th and 14th fret, all the way up to a C sharp. Yeah, that's right. All right. So this solo really it goes the whole range of a very very wide range, and because of that as well, you get a very very different dynamic response. So here when it transitions to the octave line, these parts here. Right, so during those octave parts, they're obviously going to jump out a lot more than the single note lines, right? So obviously compression is it's what we're going to need to sort of tackle this is a bit of compression. Okay, so what I'm going to use here is a really wonderful a compressor, a dynamic processor called MV2 by Waves. And MV2 is very very different from a traditional compressor. You can use it like a normal compressor if you want to. All right, it acts like one. But what's very really cool is that the controls are, first of all, really really super simple. It's got on its left what we call low level compression. So low level compression, right, acts almost like a kind of a expander slash a parallel compressor, because what it does is that low level, when what Waves refers to as low level compression is that all the softer lower level signals, right, it can lift it up in the mix, right? So all the softer parts, it can lift it all up without affecting all the peaks. You see, so in this case, I've set it in such a way, all right, that it's gonna bring it up in such a way that it really evens it out in a way that a traditional normal compressor won't do. Because a regular compressor, what it's going to do is that it's kind of going to clamp down on all those peaks, and sometimes make it sound too squashed, right? So especially on a part like this, which is super super dynamic, it's going to make it sound a little bit squashed. Okay, so but in this case, I'm going to use the low level compression. Okay, I do have a little bit of the high level. How high level compression is the normal compression that we are all familiar with, but this one is really really light. So let's see how much that we're doing it here. All right, let's engage it on. So you can see the normal compressor, the high level compression is very very subtle. It's probably only like 1 dB, one the most at the peak, maybe one and a half dB, right? But the low level compression is where the magic really is. It's great. You can it's really really great on a lot of stuff. I use it a lot on bass. I use it on vocals as well, and sometimes it can be very very effective even on snare drums. Um, a good example I can sort of just think about off of my head is, let's say you have a drummer which plays a groove but has a lot of like those ghost notes, right? So this helps. MV2 really really helps in helping you to bring out all those ghost notes, right? Because usually what without affecting the hits, you see, it helps to bring out all the lower level elements. So this is one instance, a great instance where I can use MV2 is with solos, is with lead lines, or anything that's very very dynamic. So it's again a very very transparent way of dynamic control. So check it out if you can. It's I would say MV2 doesn't really have an equivalent. I can't really think of a plugin which does a similar thing, right? Maybe with parallel compression, because it's kind of similar to that. You can also do it with parallel compression, but this is so easy because it's all inside this one plugin. It does all of that in this super simple interface. Okay, so let's check it out again, right? With MV2 and without. So this is with. So I'll play it without. So pay attention to especially the octave part in the middle. When it gets to the middle, right? Those notes, right? Because they were played really hard, they tend to jump out a little bit more. So this is without. See, there's a huge difference. I'll play that section again. This is with MV2. Right, and then this is without again. So there's a huge difference, right? So without it, all those octave parts are really jumping out. So it's a bit kind of obnoxious sounding, I must say, right? Well, because I played it really obnoxiously. Unfortunately, I have to apologize for that. Okay, cool. All right, so that's the solo. Again, very simple. Just a little bit of EQ, compression magic thanks to MV2, right? And just again a touch of reverb. Let's play it with the reverb. Okay, cool. All right. So that's all the acoustic guitars, actually. So I was noticing in the comments in the chat, what I used on the acoustic guitar was I used the Lewitt. I used my Lewitt 440 Pure. I'm using that quite a lot, actually, right? Recently. So I used that also on the backing vocals as well. So it was the Lewitt 440 going into the Taking Mic Pre and into the 1176. Again on the 1176, it's a very light compression. It's just 4-to-1, very slow attack, fastest release setting, and not more than again a few dB of gain reduction, right? So I always kind of that was the recording chain for the acoustic guitars. Okay, cool. Now, so the most important part of the mix, in my opinion, in any mix, all right, is the vocals. Okay, so Jamir recorded the vocals over in his studio over in the Philippines. So once he did that, he sent the track over. So let's just take a look at the vocals first, okay? Here we go. Let's turn on the group channel for it.
When we can't move, when the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain, when the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart, let your heart into the sound, scuffing through the air. I know you feel alone in this place. The picture on the wall slowly fades away. Memories are gone forever. Silent voices weeping. Can you hear me? When we can't move, when the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain. When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart, let your heart be unshakable.
Cool. All right. So, Jamir again from Slapshock, amazing vocal performance as always. Right. So, when he did the original, all right, we recorded that at the same time we did the first Project ER album actually. So we got extra time, so I actually got him to record this. But again, so for this version, what he's done is he changed some of the lyrics, right? To sort of reflect the kind of situation, everyone's kind of under lockdown in quarantine. You can't move, people can't go anywhere. So we have changed some of the lyrics. So it's a very dynamic vocal track, right? Because it's super super quiet in the first intro chorus and the first verse. Then it goes like really really loud in the second verse. So it's a very very dynamic track, as you can sort of see. Right, so let me just sort of show you what I do with vocals, okay? So I have on this track, first of all, ta-da, the same guy, TDR Nova, my best friend. Okay, so let me just bypass everything else first, all right? So let me just sort of show you what's happening. Let's take maybe the quiet bit, the first chorus.
When we can't move, when the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain. When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart, let your heart. When we
Okay, cool. So nothing super mysterious or complicated here. This is just a high pass filter at about 116 hertz. Well, get that means about 120. All right. So just basically just removing all the unwanted low end lah. Okay. All right. So let's move on. All right. So doing this quiet parts, there's really no issues. Right. So I don't really need to apply. Don't need to do anything to it yet. But let's move on. Let's go and check. Let's say the second chorus and second verse and second chorus where it gets louder, it gets a little bit more dynamic.
When the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain. When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart, let your heart be unshakable.
Going into the verse, the second verse.
My heart, my mind, my soul, I live it out to you. Nothing could ever break us. We can make it through.
You can hear there is a little bit of a low end leakage into the mic, probably from the headphones. I'm not sure, but it's in the context of the mix, is really not really perceptible, right?
When the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy.
So, right. So, with most singers, right. So, whenever they are singing at their higher register and when they're singing loud, sometimes you can get a little bit of harsh resonances. So when we talk about EQing and processing vocals, okay, so the first step is always more of what I call surgical, right? So we try and the first things I always kind of do is to try and sort of um, check and try to deal with all of the unwanted, maybe the uglier parts of the vocal track before I even do any sort of additional EQ. So usually in this case, this is where again a dynamic EQ is really really powerful because it will help to just tuck down those frequencies only when those frequencies start popping up, right? Again, you could always take a normal EQ and just cut. Let's say if you got something ringing. Now let's at if you got some frequency ringing at let's say 3K or 4K, you know the vocal is kind of resonating a bit of harshness there. But if you do that with a regular EQ, when the rest of the vocal when it doesn't affect it, right? It when it's not affected, when you don't hear that harshness when it's not there, the EQ is already removing those frequencies, and we don't want that, right? Because it's negatively affecting it. So let me just solo. Let's do a little hunt, little fishing expedition for the frequency. So let's just activate this band. I put my bandwidth Q to the highest, so you get the narrowest setting. Let's just look for it.
When the silence swallows you to the fire and the
Okay, right. So I always listen to it first, right? So it's kind of around.
rain, all the tragedy and pain. When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls.
Okay. I apologize because if you're listening on headphones or something like that, that could be a little bit loud, right? The very very piercing frequency. But I found it's about 3.8, right? So different singers, right, will sometimes have those kind of tones at different frequencies. So it's also sometimes dependent on the mic. Also, some microphones, some mics tend to ring at certain frequencies as well. But once you're more familiar with what tools or what mics using, or sometimes like in this case of, with the Jamir's vocals, I've mixed so many of the Slapshock albums. I'm very, very familiar with how his voice sounds and what sort of processing needs to be done. So that's where it's a little bit easier for me, you see. So okay, so this is about 3.8K. Let me turn down the gain again. Let's activate the dynamic EQ. Now for vocals, I would go to wide band, right? So you can either go into split or wideband. Basically, what it means is that split, which when you activate split here, it means that you can control all the parameters for each band individually. So it's split. So each one you have individual control. But when you go wideband, right? So in wideband mode, your ratio, your attack, and your release is going to apply for all the 4 EQ bands that are available. Okay, so basically that's what it is. Now with vocals, I would go for a slightly higher. Well, it's still very gentle, relatively speaking. So I go for a 3-to-1 ratio. Now my attack, I want it to be as fast as possible. So I bring it to 0.1. So it's almost instantaneously going to latch on to that frequency the moment it jumps out. Okay, but at the same time, I also want the release to be as fast as possible as well. So I have the release at the fast setting, which is 10 milliseconds, because again, once that frequency is gone, I want the EQ to let go. All right, I don't want it to still be hanging on and grabbing on and pushing down that frequency when it doesn't need to. So it acts quickly, and then once the offending frequency is gone, it gets out of the way. All right, so let's go out with the band solo again. So ratio 3, attack fastest, release fastest, and let's play with the threshold and let's see where it starts to help to control and bring it down.
When the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain. When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls.
I'll probably widen the Q a little bit so that because it's not strictly at just 3.8, it's a slightly wider range, maybe up to 4K, you know, a little bit slightly above and below that. So go for a little narrower Q. Okay, with a narrow Q as well, okay, you need to bring up the threshold. So you'll see what happens.
When the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain. When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart, let your heart be unshakable.
All right, cool. Okay, so yeah, so it's a very subtle thing. So again, when he sings all those, when he gets the louder, the higher registers, it helps to tuck it down a little bit, right? So be careful not to do too much, right? Because again, we will listen in context. Sometimes we feel that in solo that it's enough, but later in context with the mix, right? It might be a little bit too much. But then again, conversely, you could also be doing this and applying quite an aggressive dynamic EQ. But later on, post, you can always sometimes very often I will do this. I will sort of boost that EQ region, that EQ those frequencies back up again, so that we get an overall presence boost. But at those certain frequencies, those certain notes which poke out, that's where the dynamic EQ will help to tuck it down again. So again, let's just set and forget, right? Remember, set and forget. Let's just leave it as it is, and let's move on. I'm going to show you what's next. Okay, so same thing. Okay, no, not this one. This one. This is the track channel. Same thing. I'm going to the virtual tape machine, virtual mix rack again. Let me open that. Okay, so here is a slightly different signal path than what I have on most of the instruments. So I do start off again similarly with the VCC channel, the virtual channel. But instead of the Neve 1073 pre, I am using this one, the Hollywood, the virtual tube collection. So they have a couple of virtual pre's, right? So they have like the Hollywood, they have London, they have the New York, right? So each of them have slightly different flavors. Okay, so I like on vocals. I have I like the Hollywood module, right? On this. So what it does is it adds a little bit of saturation. It adds just a tiny touch more of saturation. So I love what it does on vocals. Right, so right after that, right, is one of the favorite things which I have when it comes to vocals, right? It's actually parallel compression. I love doing parallel compression vocals. I'm almost on every vocal which I mix, there will always be a parallel compression. So in the past, what I did was a little bit more complicated. I had to, create the track, and I had to like duplicate it, right? So when you duplicate the track, and then one track will be without the, as you can see, right? It's duplicated. So one track would be kind of dry without the compression. And then the second track is with a pretty heavily compressed, and you blend it in. But in this case, with a lot of the newer and more modern plugins that we have now, they have the blend feature, the mix feature, so you can already do. It's so much more convenient. It's so convenient to do this. You can already do your parallel compression inside one single track, instead of having to like create and duplicate tracks and have additional instances of plugins and whatnot. So again, a much more efficient workflow. So let's just take a look at what this guy is, what it's doing. Okay.
When the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm really, really loving how it sounds already. Okay,
When the silence swallows you to the fire
this is without.
and the rain, all the tragedy and pain. When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart, let your heart be unshakable.
Right. Okay. So again, one thing great about parallel compression is that it's a very transparent form of compression, right? So it helps to add that the heavily compressed section. As you can see, we're getting
When the silence swallows you
like
to the
14,
fire and the
yeah, like 14 dB of gain reduction. So that's a lot, right? Sometimes even more on some very, very dynamic vocals, maybe sometimes even up to 20 dB of gain reduction. But when you mix that in, what you have is you still have the original dynamics of the uncompressed track, but you mix that in with a very heavily compressed vocal. That helps to sort of really it's almost like magic, you know. It's almost like cheating, I would say. It's a form of cheating, lah, right? It helps you really get the end result much faster. So parallel compression. I have this set about 27, just under 30%, right? Because again, it depends on the situation. If this was a track which like had more a much more full, you know, drums, bass, electric guitars, and what's so not, I would tend to have this at 50%, 50-50. So it would be like 50-50, 50 uncompressed vocal, 50% the compressed vocal. But this is a much more sparse, much more acoustic sounding track, so I kept it a little bit lower, so about just under 30, like 27, 28%. So I just kept it down under there, right? So that is what I have on VMR, and there's still more stuff, actually, lots of stuff. Okay, now the next thing I have here is now sometimes with all that parallel compression, I insert a de-esser here, right here. So this is a wave sibilance. So sibilance was great because when the Waves introduced it, they gave it up for free. So I don't know. Hopefully you guys managed to get a copy of it. So this came out for free during like the first couple of weeks when it was released. They gave it out for free. So sibilance is really great because it's very, very transparent. One of the most transparent compressors out there. So let's play the quiet part first. See, does it do
when we
anything?
can't move, when the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain.
So just a little bit of
all the
de-essing.
tragedy and pain.
So just a little bit of de-essing, you know. So all the S's and everything, it's not gonna poke out so much. So I always tend to put a de-esser pretty early in the signal chain, right? But as you see later on in the group, which I'm gonna bus it to, there are 2 points of de-essing. So because after it's gone through all the additional compression, right, all these low-level stuff like all the S's and all the sibilances, transients may come out again. So that's where a second de-esser, you might need another de-esser at another point. So this de-esser is just kind of there to just catch all the excessive S's. You could also, right, obviously, you know, go in and edit, and you can always do clip gain out all the de-essers. If you're hardworking, you could do that, right? Okay, right. But sometimes when you press for time, this is a great tool to, you know, and helps you get the good result. So there's no reason not to use it, right? If it gets you the result that you are going for. Okay, cool. Right. So we check also again. So this is the quiet part. So we need to check So it's a little bit subtle in the quiet verse, but when it gets to louder choruses, the de-esser might be working a little bit harder. So let's double check and see that it's not slamming too much, and causing the vocals to sound like he's lisping. Okay, let's check it out.
When the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain, when the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down,
Obviously, this would be a little bit too much already, so just a little.
when everything around you falls apart, let your heart be unshakable. When the
Okay, cool. Right. So again, very, very subtle. Right. Nothing too crazy, nothing too fancy here. All right. The next thing on the chain here, this is the good old Waves Renaissance compressor. Okay. So this guy here is not doing a lot. I've said it really. It's a preset which is actually from Dave Pensado. So it's like Pensado vocal. This kind of it's like an opto, kind of like an LA2A, sort of a setting. So in this case, what I'm putting this compressor very early in the chain, right, is to do just very, very subtle compression. So
when the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain,
see,
all the tragedy and pain, when the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down.
extremely subtle. This is like at the peaks is just like bringing down only at 1 dB, right? So this is just doing, just kind of massaging the vocal a little bit, before I send it off to the group. So this is what I call, all these plugins that I have here is to sort of, again, to sort of rectify and sort of to do all the corrective surgery, all the corrective EQ that needs to be done. It's a little bit of EQ, a little bit of dynamic EQ, some de-esser, parallel compression, and just again a touch of compression, additional compression, just to keep the vocal from jumping too much. All right. So again, these are all super subtle. Okay, now it brings us to the next part of the vocal actually, right? So I will, even though this is in a track, I will send this to a group, right? And in this group itself, I have another chain. So in this chain, this is where it's more of the creative aspects. So previously, those were mostly corrective processes, right? Finding out issues, finding out problems. Here, these set of plugins that I have here is to it's for more on the creative side. Now here is where we can take our creative liberties and use and paint, and sort of sculpt the sound or paint the sound, paint the canvas the way that we want on the vocal. So a little bit more flexible. Okay, cool. So what I have, I'll just explain what I have first in the chain. So this is it starts off with a Pultec, right? A Pultec EQ, then an 1176. Wow, I love the 1176s. Same another instance of TDR Nova. Again, just in case it's there. And I mentioned again, I have a second de-esser. This is where the second de-esser comes in again. All right. And down here, right, we have our very good friend, the MV2 again. Let me just bypass this, and one very, very cool plugin, which you might or you might not have, which is Vocal Rider. I'll show you how I use it, right, later, right, in a short while. So there's UAD. This is an API 560 graphic EQ. All right, again, and then it ends up again with another instance of the virtual mix bus. So my processes is I would usually start off going with the 1176. So let's go again to this chorus. I'll play this section.
When the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain, when the wind blows,
Okay, let's engage it in.
when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart, let your heart be unshakable. When the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain, when the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down.
So, okay, I have this at the slowest attack and the fastest release, right? And as you can see, I'm pinning the gain reduction meter pretty hard on this on the vocal, right? So when it comes to you see, when it's really pretty even, right? Because of the parallel compression that I had earlier, and also the other instance of compressor, I pretty much have it under control already. So in here, I'm kind of using 1176 more of tonality. I'm trying to drive the vocal a little bit harder and to having the 1170s kind of saturate a little bit more. This being the revision A, the Rev A has a little bit more slightly dirtier sound compared to, let's say, the LN, which is the blackface, right? So the revision A is the blue stripe one, blue stripe model is a little bit more aggressive, is a little bit more dirtier sound to it. So for me, it adds a bit more aggression to the character. Again, might not always be applicable. If I want to be a little more gentle on a much more gentle kind of a track, sometimes I will swap it out for an LA2A, right? Or maybe even a blackface, or even sometimes on some female vocals, I will sometimes use a Fairchild, right, in place of this. But my first choice, usually the first thing I go to would be this 1176A. Okay, so again, it's more for tonal reasons. It's not really so much of a dynamic control now, because I really love what the 1176 is adding in terms of that, a bit of that dirt, that kind of saturation that's happening in there.
When the silence swallows you
So again,
to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain, when the wind blows.
Obviously, there is some dynamic control as well. So some of the loud notes, it is kind of controlling some of the loud notes that jump out, right? Right, but it's very much to do with the tone of the 1176 rather than just purely the dynamics, controlling the dynamics. Okay, right. So as you can see, I always kind of work on this first, and then only I kind of go back towards the EQ, right? So here is where I would always bring up the Pultec, right? To sort of add where I feel like it needs, if the vocal needs presence, if it needs a little bit more weight, right? So this is kind of where I would go into. The Pultec is no brainer. It's just a beautiful sounding EQ on really anything, and I especially love it on vocals. So for me, what I like to do is I like to actually put it before the compressor, and I don't engage it until after I've set my compression settings. Don't ask me why. It's just the way that I've sort of like the way it sounds this way. So once I kind of set the compressor already, then I will bring in the EQ. And what I like to do is I like to drive those certain frequencies into the compressor again, right? Obviously, once I engage the Pultec, it's gonna drive the 1176 in a slightly different way, right? So to me, it adds a very, very cool character to it, lah. Okay, so let's see without.
When the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain, when the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down.
Let's bypass again.
When everything around you falls apart, Let your heart be unshakable.
Yeah, so see, I have a boost at about 10K. For me, I like to go to the widest bandwidth as possible. All right. So it's a fairly a medium boost, right? Just about under 4, right? And a little bit of low end as
The
well.
silence swallows you to the fire and the rain.
It's too
All the
much.
tragedy and pain when the wind
Probably a bit
blows.
more.
When the world comes crashing down.
All right, cool. Pretty happy with the way it sounds. Okay. So again, I have these in the chain, but again, it depends. I will want to listen to it in context and see whether, do I need to apply the de-esser.
When the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain, when the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart, let your heart be unshakable. When the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain, when the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down.
Okay, so maybe just a tiny touch. So that's why, because after you've applied all this EQ and compression, you might drive all the high end up, and the compression will tend to bring up all those sibilances again. So that's why sometimes it's useful to have a de-esser before, and also to have another de-esser after that. Okay, right. So moving on. Okay. In this case, MV2, most of the times I will use it. But in this case, did I use it? Yes, I think I did. All right, so because I was kind of playing around with it before this. Okay, so let's just kind of see what is it doing.
When the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain, when the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down.
Okay, cool. So I think what I have this going on here is that it's actually not doing too much of a difference when you get to the loud part. But in the quieter verses, I think that's where you hear the most dramatic effect, because it's going to sort of bring up and lift up some of the quieter detail, right, in the first chorus and onwards. Let me just play the first chorus.
When we can't move, when the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain, when the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down.
Okay, sorry about that. The automation, I turned it on there just now. So basically, what happened to me? What happened is that the quiet choruses and the quiet verses, right? You have all that that emotion that's there in the breathing, all this the lower details, because that's where the emotion is. So what MB2 in this case helps to bring out all that low level detail. Yes, you can also sort of replicate it with with a regular compressor as well. The 1176 can also do that. But to me, the MB2 helps to bring out all the low level stuff without affecting, because I don't really want this to clamp down on the vocal anymore. It's really pretty heavily compressed already. So this is just to bring out, just to bring out all the emotion, all that breaths, the sighs, the little things, some subtle things that you can hear in Jamir's vocal. So let me just play that again.
When we can't move,
it's all the breathing,
when the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain, when the wind
Let's bypass.
blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart.
So volume wise, it's still the same, right? It's still the same volume, but it's helping to bring out all that, and at the tail end of every of the words of each line, there's sometimes a
when we can't move, when the silence swallows you to the
so especially on the end of the word move, right?
when we can't move.
Yeah, all that all that exhaling, right? All that's really where the emotion or vocal is. So what we want to do in the mix, right, is we want to bring out emotion. We want the listener to, when they are listening to the vocal and when they're listening to the track, that they feel what the singer is trying to present to them. What's the message behind it. What's the message behind the delivery. So we just trying in so doing this helps to enhance that as well. Okay. Oh wait, hello, sorry, I've not been able to check the chat messages. Who else is there? um Very cool. Hello, Wish. Hello, Swerve Official. Is that Ray? And also, right. And also, Zachary. Very cool. Very cool. Right. All right. Very, very cool. Hey guys, thanks for us joining in the stream, man. Right. I will get back, and I will definitely, if you leave your questions, right? If you have questions, you have comments, you have feedback about the stream, just please feel free. Just leave your honest feedback in the chat, right? And after the live stream is over, I'll look at it, and then we'll go, and then I'll reply all of your questions, right? Individually. Okay. Right. Cool. Uh, Moving on now. So MV2 is there. We're done with MV2. So now the next thing that I have here is, all right, okay, is a track which is a plugin which when it first came out caused a bit of controversy. Okay, Vocal Rider, because it kind of made the work of the engineers super easy. So basically, for those of you who do not know, Vocal Rider, what it does, it's like an automatic gain control. Just imagine that. You have an engineer, you have someone, you have a finger on the fader of the channel, and you are reacting in super fast time to all the dynamics inside the vocal, right? So how it works in action, it's very simple, right? You have here, of course, the main fader, which they call it the rider, right? So this is basically just your volume fader, okay, right? And this is the one which goes up and down. We'll take a look at how it works in a short while. Right, on your left, you have the range control. So the range is as the word means, is the range that where the riding will take place. So in this case, the range here is set from the lowest is at like -2, and the top is at +4. So it means that the range is 6 dB, right? So it's got that 6 dB range to sort of act and operate on. Okay, a couple of other controls here, right? You have what we call the sensitivity for the vocal. So this is kind of adjust the sensitivity of the plugin. All right. So the default settings kind of works for almost a majority of the stuff you do. So I usually always leave it at 0. Right. Of course, if you want to something that's not so, if you want it a little bit more subtle, you bring it down to negative values. If you want it to be more aggressive, react a lot more sensitive, right? React a lot more quickly, you push it to the positive values. But 0, right in the middle, which is the default setting, works great for almost everything you do. Again, you can have the speed, you can have a slow, or you can have fast, right? So in the case, I put it at slow. Right. So you can treat this, again, depending on your settings. If you put it fast, and then if you have a higher sensitivity, you can sort of use vocal riders to sort of really make sure that your vocal level stays there, right? Or in this case, right, when you put it at a much more conservative, slower values, it's kind of almost like another level of compressor, right? A much more gentle, much more transparent form of compressor. So this knob here is for music, but in this case we're not going to be using it. This is only if you're using it in the sidechain mode, which I will sort of explain in another video, in a future video. Okay, so the most important thing here is what we call the target. So the target is gonna be sort of where you want to sort of target the vocal to sort of sit. You know, what level you want it to to sit at. So this is where it's gonna be. So let's just play it and let's see how it sounds. Okay.
When we can't move, when the silence swallows you.
So you can see the way that it acts. Okay. Right. So as the vocal goes
The
on.
fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain. When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart. Let your heart. When we can't move.
Cool. So that's what Vocal Rider does. Okay. So I felt it. Sometimes generally it was doing a little bit more pushing up, bringing up the level. So on the output you can also compensate. So I compensated it down for about 1 dB. So there are different ways you can sort of work. You can sort of leave it in this in this mode where it almost acts like another compressor. Okay, but what I'm gonna do now is actually, if you want to have a little more fine control, detailed control over how Vocal Rider is going to work, right? Is what we can do is we can always write automation to it. So that's usually what I'm going to be doing next. Okay, so that's what we do. So how we do it? Okay, how we're going to do this is that, okay, when we look at Vocal Rider, down here you have your automation controls. You have to, of course, select and engage it to go into write mode, right? And secondly, also have to make sure that in this case, I'm using Cubase. You have to make sure that your channel, whatever DAW you're using, you also have to activate your write automation in that channel as well. Okay, right. So here we go, and let me just pull it up. You are probably gonna be able to see, right? Where is it? Can we see where the automation track is? No, not yet. Let's take a look. Okay, I think you have to start it, let it run first, then only you see. Okay, here we go. I'm just going to let it run. Oh, there we go. There it is. So you can see what the Vocal Rider is doing in terms of controlling the gain.
Listen to the sound scuffing through the air. I know you feel alone in this place. The picture on the wall slowly fades away. Memories are gone forever. Silent voices weeping. Can you hear me? When we can't move, when the silence swallows you, to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain. When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart. Let your heart be unshakable. Tears are gone when the clouds pass by. Hold your head up high. Oh, the sun will shine when we can't move, when the silence swallows you, when all your hope is gone, you lose the strength to carry on. When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, just believe you'll make it through the day. Don't lose your higher soul, and don't you lose your way. When everything around you falls apart, let your heart be unshakable, be unbreakable, be unshakable. When we can't move.
All right. Okay. Cool. So that went into a loop a little bit. All right. Are you guys still there? Thanks for still sticking around, man. If you're still there, really appreciate it. Once again, I'm gonna leave all the links to how you can sort of contribute, where you can send your donations to in the description. All right, and let's continue on. Okay, thanks for sticking around. Okay, so now that we've written the automation of Vocal Rider, we'll activate the read mode. So now Vocal Rider is not going to act on its own, but it's going to read the automation that has already been written. Okay, so let's go. Let's disengage the write mode on the channel, and here you go. You get all of this. All right. Yes, Zakwan. It does look therapeutic. It looks like like an ECG machine that's strapped to your brain and reading your brain signals, right? So it kind of looks cool that way. Okay, so now with Vocal Rider, okay, it does the job very well, and sometimes maybe a little too well. Okay, and what I mean by that is that it kind of keeps everything so super consistent around this target level, because that's what you've set. You see, you've already set a certain target level. You want it to sort of the vocal to sort of hover around there. But in some cases, in certain styles of music, that not necessarily is going to be a good thing. So like if a song is let's say it does not have a lot of varying dynamics, it's a very straight up, very consistent song, maybe like EDM or something like that, right? So maybe in that case, Vocal Rider will kind of help to put your vocal and set it around that level. But in this case of a song like this, which starts out really quietly, right? It starts out really it starts out softly, then goes loud, then it goes quiet again, right? So on music, on songs, there's a lot more dynamic. You may have to do a little bit of additional automation, and very often that's what I will do. Okay, so in this case, right, as you can see on the lead vocal group, I've also automated the channel fader as well. So for example, for instance, when it starts off in this quiet section,
When we can't move, when the silence swallows you, to the fire and the rain,
it starts all the way down here, you see? It starts all the way down. I pump it up.
when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart.
Because if you don't do this, right, and if you just kind of leave your fader at your normal setting, it's gonna sound, the vocal, yes, it's gonna sound consistently at that level, but that's not going to be appropriate for, let's say, the intro, the quiet parts, the quiet bits of the song. That's essentially where the automation needs to come in as well. Now, I may go a little bit more fine-tooth, go through a little more fine-tooth comb, but that will take a lot more time as well, because one thing about Vocal Rider that is that it it being software, it being a sort of an algorithm, it knows it does its thing very very well. You see, so it will always react towards the level of and always react towards the level of the vocal part that it's processing. But what I'm trying to say is that, um, but the way our human ear hears it, it's that it's not necessarily going to be appropriate. What vocal writer does, what vocal writer does, may sometimes not be enough. Okay, here's a good example, right? So we have in when we speak and when we sing, different vowel sounds. You have the A, E, I, O, U, right? So depending on it depends on the person, the individual voice as well. But if you listen to someone say A, E, I, O, U, right? The O and the U sounds, even though if let's say you measure it on a meter, so even though you measure it, it's at the same um it measures at the same volume, same loudness, but our ear might not perceive it. We actually kind of perceive the O and the U sounds a little softer, right? So this is where we need to go in with a little bit more a detailed fine tooth comb, right? So one great thing is that we can of course go into detail here and automate, because this has gone right down to all the individual phrases and words. We can always adjust and tweak all the automation points here. Excuse me. Or alternatively, you can always tweak, and sometimes I will just do that, right? On the group settings here, right? But as you can see, the automation here is I put it it starts off here and then it gradually goes up as the song builds up. Okay, cool. Here it dips down a little bit again, where there's a little quiet bit after the solo. Then back off the highest and the loudest point right here, back up to -1 dB. Right, it goes back to -1 here. Sorry about that. Yeah, -1. This is like the towards the end of the finale, the outro, and the last chorus of the song. Okay, cool. Just give me a second. All right, I'm going to talk about the effects next. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about about the effects. Firstly, let me just turn off the automation. Excuse me. Choked on a little bit of water. Don't worry. No fever, no nothing. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. What sort of effects that I like to use on vocals? Okay, so there's a couple of things. So nowadays most of the recording environments we have are usually like really really small rooms. Even my live room here is not a huge large space. Or sometimes vocals are recorded in like small vocal booths, so they tend to be very very dry, very very dead sounding lah. Right. So what I really miss about working in like big studios like in Synchro Sound back in this is that we used to record the vocals right out there in the huge live space. The like in where I used to work in Studio A, you could fit a whole orchestra inside. So we used to record vocals in there. So what we always had a little bit of good room sound inside the vocals. So I wanted to sort of recreate that. So there are ways of doing it. You can always use either a reverb, you can use a combination of delay, you can use a reverb on some kind of on a room setting, or something like that, a very very short room setting. But what I like to do, is I actually like to use a delay for that. So what I use it here is Waves Super Tap, right? So Super Tap is a multi-tap delay. So in this in the other versions, you can have up to 6 delay lines. But in this case, I'm just using the basic. I'm just using 2. Right. So what I have going on here, all right, is that it's a super 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 short delay. What I'm trying to simulate is like inside a nice sounding studio room, right? So it's a super short delay. And what we have here is also the very important thing is that I have rolled off all the frequencies above 1.5 kilohertz. So here, right, I have a little filter, low pass filter, everything above 1.5K. But the feedback is 0. You don't engage the feedback because we don't want this to be like a delay per se. We don't want the feedback. We just want it to be a single reflection back and forth again. So let's take a look at the delay here and see what it sounds like. Okay, let's just see what it sounds like.
Follows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain.
Okay, it's very subtle. So what I'll do is I'll just pump it up a little bit so you can hear it a little bit more.
When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around
All right, so this is obviously a little bit too much, right? So just bring it down. Usually what I do is I just bring it down to a level where it's just, you can just hear it.
you falls apart. Let your heart.
Let's do that again.
When we can't move, when the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain. When the wind
So this is dry.
blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything.
Yeah, so it's very subtle. It's just there to add and just to, put the vocal into a space. Like, oh, it's inside a very, very nice, fancy, expensive sounding studio, right? So I use Super Tap to achieve that. Okay, so the next thing I would usually add, all right, when it comes to vocals is I usually put a mono delay. So I think the topic of using delays and versus reverbs is something that you can very easily read up on. So I'm not going to go too much in depth in that. But basically, I'm just going to set so that again this mono delay is going to go right up the center, just to give it a little bit of front to back perspective, a little bit more depth.
When we can't move, when the silence swallows you to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain.
Okay, let me check and see. Oh, the delayed, the FX channels are muted as well because of that. Okay, let me do that again. Let me show you what it sounds like. Okay,
When the wind
you can hear that. So that's where the mono delay.
blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart, let your heart.
Yeah, so it's there, very, very subtle. So in this case, I'm using the Brainworks delay. All right. So it's tempo synced, obviously, so that you're getting 8 notes very, very short. So it almost acts like a kind of a slapback. Okay. All right. So nothing unusual there. It's pretty standard. It's pretty ordinary. Okay. So what I have next, right, is a doubler. So sometimes you want to make the vocal sound a little bit fatter, a little bit more wider, a little bit slightly more richer sounding, right? So one ways of doing it is using some kind of chorusing. You can use a flanger, you can use a phaser, you can use some kind of a modulation. But in this case, this instance, what I like to use is a waves. It's a plugin called Waves Doubler, right? So basically, it's a combination. It basically detunes. It's a combination of a pitch shifter, detuner, modulation / modulation kind of a plugin. So what it helps to do is that you can either make like fake double tracking effects or chorusing. It's pretty versatile. So what I do is like I set it to a usually what I would do is this one, doubler EQ'd. So one thing about the doubler is that sometimes you want to add that space, but you don't want to muddy. Again, you don't want to clutter up. You don't want to muddy up your lows. You don't want to muddy up your lower mids. So that's why here this EQ, they have a built-in EQ which you can sort of shape it, because you want it to be if you wanted to add a bit of width, a bit of size to the vocal, but you don't want it to start sounding muddy and mushy at the bottom end, you see. So this way it's EQ'd. So pretty much, it rolls off about 1K, and then above 1K, 4K onwards, you get a high-end boost. So, you get that airiness, you get that wide sense of space around it. So again, I'll play it for you so you can sort of hear how it sounds like.
When we can't move, when the silence swallows you.
Right, so this is exaggerating it so that you can hear how it sounds like. Obviously, this might sound a little bit too mechanical and too affected already. So again, I want it to be very, very subtle.
To the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain, when the wind blows.
Listen in context, because it's very important. Again, always check, right? So sometimes in solo you feel that it's enough, but sometimes when you play it in the context of the track, suddenly all the effects kind of disappear, right? And vice versa, sometimes when you solo the track, it feels like, oh wow, there's a lot of reverb, a lot of delay going on, right? It's like so wet, but actually in the context of the track with all the other instruments and the parts playing, it might be perfect, it might fit just well. So it's always good to check in context. Okay, here we go, and let's play.
When the silence swallows you.
Okay, let me just unsolo the master channel. Here we go.
When we can't move, when the silence swallows you, to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain.
Okay, cool. All right. So I'm gonna add one more thing, right? I'm gonna have a little bit more as well, and I've got my delay, I've got my room, and what I'm going to very, very subtly add is a bit of reverb. Okay, right. Again, it's a more acoustic kind of a track, so you can have a little more intimate sounding. You can have a little more sound, a little bit wetter. Okay, so there's two. This is the same reverb which I've sent, the plate reverb which I've sent to the acoustic guitars and all that. Let's just check it out how it sounds.
When we can't move, when the silence swallows you, to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain.
Yeah, just to make it like, very warm. You want the vocal to sort of, kind of be enveloping you, because the that's the idea behind the delivery of the vocal anyway. You want to feel like the singer is like putting his hands around you, giving you a big hug, telling you that it's okay, everything is okay, even though we're going through all this difficult time, and this we're struggling, and we're trying to survive through all this. So I'm not going to ramble on too much, right? Just going to move on and so you can hear how it sounds. Now, I think I have this second reverb here, right? This additional reverb. So this is a different reverb. This is going also to another plate, but this is UAD's EMT 140. Yep, EMT 140. Oh no, I don't have it engaged, do I? I guess probably not. Okay, let's try it when it's out. Usually on vocals, I love to use the UAD AMT 140. Right, so depending on what sort of style, like in this case, if it was a male, I have this little preset which I have going on. Right, and it's a very short reverb. It's about 1.5 seconds, maybe 1.5 seconds. But the one thing that I have very important, all right, to sort of to show you. Okay, one thing that I have very set is my pre-delay, right? So I have this pre-delay set pretty far back, so that as you know, if so that it almost acts like a so when the reverb starts, it kind of starts a little bit further. What it does is that it gives again an impression. It gives the illusion of size and space when you have a slightly bigger pre-delay. Also, it also helps to sort of separate the reverb from the actual dry vocal as well. Again, because we don't want it to sound like it's being washed in reverb. You want to sort of maintain a bit of separation. So that's where the pre-delay comes in. Okay, so with the pre-delay, it depends. On some songs, I will sort of match the pre-delay setting to tempo, right? But when it comes to a more acoustic song, I guess again, I'm just kind of playing it by ear. So let's just see how it let's just see how it goes.
The wind blow when the world comes crashing down.
Okay, let me just turn off the other reverbs first and all the other effects so we could just hear the EMT.
When everything
There we go, very, very subtle.
around you falls apart. Let your heart.
Okay, cool. So if you pay attention, you can hear that because of the pre-delay, the reverb actually comes in a little bit later. Let me set how it goes if I put the pre-delay down to 0.
When we can't move, when the silence swallows you, to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain.
For me, it starts to muddy up. Obviously, it's too much reverb, but I'm just bringing it up so that you can sort of hear what it's doing. All right, so let's bring it back up. This is great thing about this is the UAD. In this case, it doesn't give you a numerical reading. You really have to use your ears and listen to how much pre-delay is being added.
When we can't move,
you can hear the difference.
When the silence swallows you, to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain.
So you get the space, you get the space, but you still have the separation. You see, okay, cool. All right, let's move on. All right, you're gonna spend a lot of time on the vocals. I apologize if I have spent a lot of time on vocals, but because the vocals are such an important part of the song, because that's where the listener, that's where your average listener, your audience, that's where your fans are. It's really going to, you lose your attention. You lose the listener if they cannot hang on, if they cannot hold on to every word of the vocals. So that's why vocals are so important. Okay, right. So now here's another thing, an additional part. If you would have, if you can sort of take a look down here, let's go into, let's say, the choruses. I'm going to play the second in the middle of the song.
My heart, my mind, my soul.
Okay, cool. Right. So what's happening here is that in every chorus, let me play that for you.
Silent voices weeping. Can you hear me?
I've automated so that every time we get into a chorus, I start sending it to a stereo delay, right? So it's the same plugin, all right? It's the same Brainworks BX delay, but this time the mono delay was at 8 notes. What I have in this instance is that I have it at half that time, so it's a quarter note, and this is a quarter dotted, right? So the left and right is slightly different delay times. So what helps is that this adds dynamically to the performance. I'll play it for you first, so you can sort of take a listen to what's going on. Chorus.
When we can't move, when the silence swallows you, to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain. When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart, let your heart be unshakable.
So now when I've gone to a bigger section of the song, like in the chorus onwards, right, I've automated it so that the stereo delay kicks in. So first chorus, first verse, it's all mono. Everything's mono with a bit of reverb. The reverb obviously is in stereo, but when we kick into the second chorus, when Jamir's vocals goes into the loud parts, that's where stereo delay comes in. So it adds a little bit more of excitement. You get a bit more of movement again, bigger. This is where we. In mixing, one of the things we manipulate emotions. Like I said, everything it's about trying to convey the emotion. You're trying to convey the feeling, the message of the song. So there are ways of doing it, and we do it by using these tools, by using compression, using EQ, using effects. We're manipulating emotions, right? So in this case, we're trying to create size. We're going to make it like the chorus is much more impactful, right? We want the vocal to sound a little bit bigger, to sound a little bit wider, a little bit more, wrapping around the listener's ears. So this is why I sort of use this. I engage and then use a sort of a stereo delay. So let's take a look again. So you can look here at the automation points, right? At the vocal. Let me show it to you. So going from the verse.
Memories are gone forever. Silent voices weeping. Can you hear me? When we can't move, when the silence swallows you, to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain.
Let me play that again because again the some weirdness. The effects channel was muted. Let's try again.
Silent voices weeping. Can you hear me?
And the stereo delay kicks in.
When we can't move, when the silence swallows you, to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain, when the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down.
So you can hear the ping ponging effect of the stereo delay, right? You can use a ping pong delay, you can use any sort of thing, but again, we're creating dynamics and manipulating emotion, making when the dynamics of the song needs to go up, we add a bit of size, a bit more weight to it, right? So that is basically the vocals actually, all right? So a couple of other things before we move on to the strings, right? There are a few other additional miscellaneous stuff which I've added as well. There's some cymbal swells. There's like one little timpani, and there's a shaker, right? So the cymbal swells are some samples that I've have in my sample library. Timpani again was also using the same orchestral library, right? So these are timpani rolls that happen here. Let me just play that.
When we can't move, when the
and also at the end.
Unshakable.
Okay, straightforward, nothing super fancy and complicated there. Okay, so the shaker was recorded live, right? So this is a real shaker, all right? In fact, I have it right here. This little thingy right here. So I added this shaker just to give it again when it gets to the second verse onwards, right? To give it a little bit more excitement.
My heart, my mind, my soul, I live it out to you. Nothing could ever break us.
Okay. Again, nothing super fancy on this, right? We can obviously do a little high pass filter and just filter out everything below 500. Just give it a bit of reverb. Okay, it's too much. Just a little bit, all right?
I'm praying for a better day.
All right, cool. Okay, so those are some of the other miscellaneous elements. So that kind of leaves us last with the strings, okay? And again, thanks again for sort of sticking around all this while, right? We are coming up to almost 3 hours already. Thanks for staying there, man. Okay, so with strings, okay, these are all programmed. So some of you may not know, but guitar is not actually my first instrument, right? It's not even my second instrument. It's actually my third. First ever instrument which I grew up playing with was actually keyboard, organs. I actually went for like techniques organ lessons when I was a kid. And when I got to secondary school, I picked up my second instrument was actually the violin, right? Ha, you didn't know, right? So I was a violin player for most of my teenage years until about Form 5 lah. Until I decided that, a violin's only got four strings. Four strings not enough, so let's graduate and just move on to something with more strings. So that's where I started picking up guitar, right? So unfortunately my violin skills now and my intonation has really, gone rusty. But because of that, I felt that of my sort of earlier on classical background, it's very, very important. And what I'm trying to get to is that with writing for strings, you need to really understand and sort of know a couple of things, right? Again, it's a very wide topic. I'm not going to go so much detail in it because that could take up another whole video's worth of time. But basically, it's very important to always remember that a string section, generally a typical symphonic orchestra section, you have four parts. You have your first violin, second violin, your violas, your cellos, and in some cases, obviously, with maybe from the Romantic era onwards, like 19th century, 20th century onwards, you have a lot more inclusion of the double bass, the contrabass, right? So this is how, when I wrote all the different parts, I always ensured that I wrote it with these four sections in mind. Right, so you want to get realistic, proper string arrangement, string sections. Always write it. It's good to take some lessons. I recommend that you try if you really want to learn, or you can either take lessons or read up or do a little bit of research on how to do orchestral arrangements and writing. But one of the main things and a very, very common mistakes, so to speak, mistakes, is that sometimes we write some of the sections and arrangements which are a little bit too complex, too dense, right, for a real orchestra to play. So a good starting point is to bear in mind the different sections and write it accordingly. Okay, so you have here, like I can show you, first violin. I'll just play from the end, the last chorus, so you can sort of hear. First violin. Second violin. It's playing in unison in this case. It's pretty much all unison, right? Can I have a viola? And then a cello. Okay, and I also do have a contrabass, which is the double bass, right? Right, I call it CB because it's actually contrabass. Okay, right. So I do have the double bass, but only coming in at the very end, and this is mainly just playing long notes. Right. Again, you need to understand, right? The different instruments and what their capabilities are, right? You do not expect why contrabass only plays the long notes. You don't expect the contrabass, double bass player to be like, not to say that they can't, but it's really unusual if you have them playing super fast, complicated jumpy lines on a double bass. So double bass parts usually I would rather keep it really simple and straightforward. Now, there are a couple of other articulations which I've also used as well, right? So I like to sort of blend in. Obviously, using sample libraries, it takes programming strings is very, very hard. All right, it's very, very time consuming because you have to pick all the different types of articulations. Like where you need your staccato, where you need all your accents and your marcatos, wherever. So in this case, like on some of these parts, right, I have also layered and I've marked it here, a same thing for the four sections again: first violin, second violin, viola, violoncello, but a detache. Right, so detache means that It's Italian for the word detached, right? Detache, right? So it means that each note, has a very clear attack, clear separation. It's different from a staccato. Staccato means a very, very short note. Detache means that it's notes, but each one sounds separate. So let me just solo how a detache note would sound like, right? So here we go. So this little section, right? So you get each note, this little run here, which is a lot more clearer. All right, it's there to give a little bit definition because if I were just to use the standard, the regular patch, the attack is not really fast enough. Okay, so that's why I layer this inside. Okay, so what you're hearing so far, these are all actually solo patches. So this is like a solo violin, solo viola, solo cello, right? But for size, right, and this is something that when it comes to using program strings, it's kind of have to work around to sort of get the real richness of getting a real orchestra. Is sometimes you have to combine both. So these are solo patches, but what I have down here as well, this is actually a sample, the patch, which is of more of a full string orchestra. So the entire orchestral section. So combined together, right? If it's just the full section alone, it sounds like this. Okay, cool. Yeah. So that's where the combination is. You see, so the strings give you the fullness, but the solo parts give you all the detail and the expression, right? Because of the vibratos and the articulations. So combined. Cool. All right. I've also got a little bit a patch here, which is a tremolo patch. So tremolo is it's very very fast repeated notes. So this is usually on notes which I want to accent. This will have a little bit of a volume curve to it. Right, so it adds a bit of that attack and that urgency to it. Okay, so now let's go into the processing for the strings. Okay, so similarly, okay, I also kind of the couple of things which I love to use. All right, so the one which I use most of the time is the multiband compressor, Wave C4. Right. So what this multiband compressor does is, again, it kind of gives you an overall overview, right, of all the different frequencies. Again, I'm using it so that nothing pokes out too much. That's what I'm using it for. And the preset I kind of use here is what we call the upward compressor, plus 5 dB. So this does make it a little louder. So obviously in the mix you can always compensate. I can always compensate by bringing the output down minus 5 dB, or in the situation I use it, I can always bring it down on the track, the channel fader as well. So I kind of love to use this, like a kind of an upward expander. Upward compressor basically means it's an expander, right, on string parts, because it helps to bring down. Again, we're trying to bring out all the low level detail, right? Without having it like clamped down like a compressor, because it's gonna sound very unnatural if you compress very organic instruments like strings and all that. It sounds very unnatural if if you use very, very heavy compression on that. So instead, we are going to use an expander instead, to try and bring up all the low-level material without affecting all the dynamics, without affecting the transients. So C4 is what I'm primarily going to using. Now, I also have MV2 here just to show you that you could also use MV2 as well. The same way that I use it on the vocals, the same way I use it on the guitar solo. This is also another way, the possible way of using it. Any kind of or even parallel compression. Again, if you want to keep the compression you want to control and maintain your dynamics, but you don't want it to sound like you want it to sound very transparent. You don't want it to sound like it's very obviously being compressed. Any kind of a parallel compressor with a parallel compression will also do a great job. But in this case, I'm just going to use Waves C4. So let's take a look at, let's just say the first violin first of all. Let's solo this. So now, very obviously, the first thing when it comes to violin, you can chop off all the low end. So I'm going to set my high pass really high up here. Okay, so 300 hertz, all right? 300 hertz high pass filter all the way, almost up to 400 actually. It's like 370. Okay, so another thing, unfortunately, about sample the instruments, all right, and obviously, if you get a very, very expensive, what I use here is a Miroslav Philharmonic, which I think it's quite an affordable. It's an affordable sample library, but of course, they for dedicated like film score arrangers and all that, they would probably go with something a little bit more higher end, like a East West or using Vienna Symphonic. Now those are super fantastic, right? But incredibly massive sample libraries. So for me, Miroslav Philharmonic does the job really, really well. It is not super expensive and it's not so resource intensive like something like Vienna Symphonic Library is. So, but the one downside is that sometimes because of the recording or the quality of the samples and all that, sometimes you get the same problems that with some weird resonances and weird ringing sounds. So this is where I have to come in and play around with it. Yep, for me. So around 3K, right? So around 3K is where you have a little bit of that note that's kind of ringing there, and with strings it's actually very typical. 3K, 4K. We want to hear the string, we want to hear the warmth, we want to hear the vibrato, but we don't want to hear the the rosin. You see the rosin. We don't want to hear all the hissiness that's coming out of the strings. So this is what I'm going to do, right? So, right, that's with the first violin. Yep, that's it. Just a simple little EQ there. So let's go on with the second violin part. Let's do the same thing. Let's switch on my Wave C4 again. Again, I've already sort of prepared this preset and also the threshold level. This is slightly lower. Let's play that again. Okay, so this note here is kind of ringing out, so let's do a little cut here. And there's also another one at about 4.5K. All right, okay. So with a lot of these strings, sometimes you can also kind of remove everything that's above like 15K, 12, 15K, because you really don't need all that super high top end. So let's do the same, right, with all that, right? Helps to give a bit of space as well. Let's go with the violas next. So I'm hearing this frequency. It's about 3.8K. Let's get rid of that. And kind of around 970, right? So that note kind of pokes out, right? Now, again, you can actually use TDR Nova, right? Which probably gonna give you a little bit more transparent results. But for me, when it comes to the strings, all right, I usually just kind of use the stock EQ that comes with Cubase. You can also do that with any sort of DAW, all right? Because for me, it doesn't affect it too much, not as detrimental an effect, negative an effect as if you were using it on, let's say, on the other vocal part. Again, maybe because the strings are gonna be more of a background thing, right? If it's on a vocal or like a bass, probably that's where I would kind of prefer TDR, to use TDR's EQ and dynamic EQ instead of just a regular EQ, right? But in my experience, like for strings, it's not a huge deal. I'll just use a stock EQ. Like, so let's go to the cello. Okay, you can hear this little ringy thing here. But it's about 1.7K. All right, cool. There are some other resonating frequencies as well, but those don't really jump out so much. So that's actually okay. You see, that's actually fine. That's how some of the instruments actually do sound. So you don't want to just chop out everything, because if it ends up sounding very thin, very kind of out phasey kind of a situation. Okay, so let's take that out. So that this one little offending frequency. Okay, let's do the same thing for the detache. Okay, for detache. Oh, let me put it in. It looks like I haven't put this in yet. So dynamics C4 stereo. Let's go for this upward compressor. So you can see what it does. Let's roll off. Okay, I'm gonna just copy the settings over first and just tweak the EQ. This is over there. So I just copy the plugin settings. Here we go. So a bit of there. Let's go with the viola. It's about 2.9K. So we want a cello. Okay, this is a bit too high. Let's bring back the low end. Cello, I don't think it really needs anything. I think I just leave it like that. In fact, I'll roll it off a little bit lower. Yeah. Okay, let's go on to the main string part itself, like the full string section. right? You can sort of see that it's kind of always around that area, between 3K ish, a little bit higher, a little bit below. So that's where you want to sort of pay your attention to, lah. All right. Okay. When it comes to staccato and strem parts, I usually again don't here. I've decided not to because this is not super dynamic. So staccato parts are, staccato notes are just single, short, very, very quick notes. So in this, for staccato parts, I usually don't put any sort of a dynamics processing. So I don't have the wave C4 over there, but I will EQ it a little bit. So it's a bit of a nasally sound there, about 2K.
I hope that y'all could hear me. I'm praying for a better day.
Okay, great. So these are all again similar to what we were doing with the vocal, doing some corrective EQ, corrective stuff. And now we're gonna go back down to the. We're gonna go to all of the strings are all gonna be routed to the string group, which is here. So the string group, what I have here is I do have an LE2A, right? What it does is that it does a very, very mild bit of compression.
My heart, my mind, my soul.
It's a bit too much. So again, not much, not more than 1-2 dB. Because you sort of want to let orchestral stuff, strings and all that breathe and have their natural dynamics. So okay, I have also super simple, right? So just one LA2A, and then I have an instance of again another plate EQ, another plate reverb. Okay, right. So this EMT is there again. Options. Sometimes I may decide to use the EMT instead of Liquid Sonic's plate reverb. So, but in this instance, I'm just going to stick with what I already have in there. So same thing, but at the end of the group, another instance of virtual mix bus, and there we got your strings. That's
My heart, my mind, my soul. I live it out to you.
okay. It's at this point where I will usually go back and take a look at the master section when I have most of the main parts in. All right. So strings in this case, I always put it. For me, when I mix, the order of what I do is I try to bring in the vocal as early as possible, because because this helps to fit the rest of the parts, right, to support the vocal instead of because if you sort of like mixed all the music there, you've EQ'd everything nicely, sometimes you find that, oh no, you kind of have to do a lot of drastic processing to make that vocal stand out, right? Which means sometimes like having to really EQ the vocal a lot, right? So doing this way, trying to bring in and mixing the vocal in early, make sure it helps you to ensure that everything else, right, that comes after that supports the vocal instead of fighting with it, right? So that's why the strings came in later. So so very typically the next thing at this point in time, I would already start taking a look at the master section again. So remember going back to the C4 which I have on the Masterbuss. So I'm gonna go, let's say, on all the loud parts of the song. I'm gonna play maybe the loud parts because this is usually where stuff starts to poke out, you see. So let's just play it around here. Let's go into last chorus actually.
Hold your head up high. Oh, the sun will shine. shine when we can't move.
So I'm going to just bring the overall threshold down so until you see a tiny bit of movement on the gain reduction.
When the silence swallows you, when all your hope is gone,
That's it. All right. It's just going to do the absolute tiny, most minimal bit of gain reduction. Okay. Now, in this case, let's just play around with the virtual bus compressor and just see what happens. All right. Because usually when it's something more acoustic and more organic, I'm not going to apply a lot of compression on the master, but let's just see what happens. All right. We never know. All right. We always have to try.
when the clouds pass by, hold your head up high. Oh, the sun will shine when we can't move, when the silence swallows you, when all your hope is gone, you lose the strength to carry on. When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, just believe you'll make it through the day. Don't lose your heart, your soul, and don't you lose your way. When everything around you falls apart, let your heart be unshakable, be unbreakable.
Okay, so sometimes I'm kind of always jumping back and forth. So you see, I was jumping back to the acoustic guitar because I felt that it's a little bit too loud, a little bit too loud in front. Now I'm jumping back into the lead vocal again because now I'm hearing it in context with the strings. I feel that it needs to have a little bit more presence, needs to stand out a little bit more in front. So just gonna apply the EQ to that, and that's where on my lead vocal, that's where this API 560, this is a graphic EQ. I find that it's really really helpful to just making that final little bit of a polish, a little bit of touch to the vocals.
Your head up high. Oh, the sun will shine when we can't move, when the silence swallows you, when all your hope is gone, you lose the strength to carry on. When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, just believe you'll make it through the day. Don't lose your heart, your soul, and don't you lose your way. When everything around you falls apart.
All right, cool. I'm pretty happy with how the vocal and everything sits right now. So very subtle. I think what I just did was just like really just 1 dB of gain reduction on the FG Gray, which is an SSL bus compressor, and the rest of it I'm just letting it do its magic, running through the virtual mix rack and going through the virtual tape to the tape machine. Right, it's just there again just to emulate the workflow and the signal flow of an analog console. So last thing, right, to fit in would be all the BVs. Okay, so BVs again, nothing fancy, nothing super complicated. These again, I recorded the BVs over here. So again, these were all recorded with a tiny bit of compression. So I go through this similar kind of a treatment. Excuse me. Almost with every vocal, I'll always have the same parallel compression chain. But with backing vocals, I kind of use a different preamp selection. So instead of the Hollywood, which has a bit more color, I go with the 1073. All right. So what else is there? And again, with BVs and things like doubles and ad-libs, it's a slightly less complicated signal chain, because again, you don't really need to apply too much because these are all backing vocals. So a touch of mono delay, a bit of stereo delay, A little bit of reverb again, similar things. For the BVs, again, you don't really need all that low end, so everything below 280 has been shelved off. Everything above 15K has also been rolled off as well. And just take a quick listen to the part. So again, the BVs just come in to support on certain phrases. I'll play the ending section. Here we go.
When the tears are gone, when the clouds pass by, hold your head up high. Oh, the sun will shine when we can't move, when the silence swallows you, when all your hope is gone, you lose the strength to carry on. When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, just believe you'll make it through the day. Don't lose your higher soul, and don't you lose your way. When everything around you falls apart, let your heart be unshakable, be unbreakable, be unshakable.
All right. Okay. So nothing too complicated. There are basically two harmonies. All right. Two harmony parts to it. Right. One's like a tenor high part, and one's like a lower baritone part. In this song, right, I'm not double tracking, right? So these are all just single tracks. Usually, though, typically, if you're in a much more denser, much more complex production, usually would already have been each harmony part would have been double tracked. So instead of just these two tracks, you would have seen four tracks at least, right? Right. Sometimes maybe more. But in a more organic situation, we keep it really really simple. Okay, cool. Now, so what left? Well, let's just play the whole thing from top to finish, right? So what's gonna be left is I may go back, right, and fine tune a little bit more on all these automations, right? Usually in this case, what I would do when I fine tune vocal automation is I usually switch over to a different pair of monitors. What I have is I have got a pair of like the big speakers which I'm using now, the LP8s, Kali Audio LP8s, right? So the big speakers kind of tell me the most of the full frequency, but I want to go in to sort of play around with balances and automations. I usually switch to a smaller pair of monitors because I want to focus more on the mid range. So that's where it's very important. So in this situation, I'll usually switch to the Yamaha NS10s, and then even maybe sometimes to smaller speakers as well, like a laptop speakers that I have there. I've got a pair of laptop speakers here. I got another pair of old laptop speakers there as well, which I use to check vocals as well. So I'll usually fine tune this sort of stuff. Okay, so one more thing before I sort of do a run through a quick print of this, I'm going to show you how I actually export it. So when you export them and when you export the final mix, there are a couple of ways of doing it. You can always do an offline, the regular offline export or render or bounce, depending on what DAW you use. They call it differently. It means the same thing. Basically, you create an offline render, right, and create and bounce the output to a stereo file. Okay, so what I'm doing, the way that I mix is actually a kind of sort of a hybrid. The way that I've set up is a bit of a hybrid digital and versus and analog, because what I do is I actually run my outputs of my converters, my interface, back out into a pair of Focusrite preamps, right, and those ISA2s. So I use I output from my converters into the line inputs of the, again, I will again demonstrate this in another video in the future if you would like to see how I do it. Okay, so basically it's a hybrid section, right? So it's going out and I'm running it through a piece of hardware, in this case the Focusrite preamp, and recapturing it back with my 80 converters again. So it's going out into the analog realm. It's going to, I'm running it through the Focusrite to get some of that analog goodness, so to speak. Okay, and then recapturing again. So the way we describe it, the way we describe it is that we print the mix. So let me just show you how it goes. All right. So let's go to my input. Let me show you all the. Let me just change the views first. The console views. Let's see, how do we change it to you can see the inputs. There we go. Okay, let me also, so you can only see only the input and your output, right? So the leftmost is my ISA mix stereo, that's my input, and right is the output, okay, or the master section which I have. Okay, so I'm not using the saturator because again I don't feel it needs it. This sort of track, you want to keep it as organic as possible. You don't really need to run it through additional saturation again. Okay, all right. So what I do, so and what you're gonna see is that basically what I do is I set this track called the full mix track, right, to sort of capture and re-record the audio, right? So again, let's set the start points and the end points. Okay, let's check where does the end point. Be very careful because you want to make sure that the reverb, that your tails, you don't cut it off. Yep, so about 1 bar 161 would just do perfectly fine. So once we arm this, make sure that we set it to punch out there so that it doesn't keep on recording, right? Otherwise you have to it's a bit of a hassle because you have to kind of trim it and re-edit it and rebounce it. So better to get it right first time. So for me, doing this is kind of a good habit because sometimes when you do an offline bounce, there's always that weird possibility, maybe some plugin or maybe some VSC instrument who can glitch. It's not likely, but there's always a possibility of it glitching, or sometimes you've missed some kind of a glitch, a click, a pop, or something like that, and you don't really realize it. You don't realize it until you've already bounced the track out. And sometimes you already send it for mastering, then only you realize that, oh darn, there's a little glitch, there's a little click, there's a little pop that's happening there. So it's a good habit to sort of do this, right? Real-time printing and bouncing. So it gives you another opportunity to just listen to it. And very often, and when I do this, I'll either listen on headphones so that I can make sure that I'm picking out any sort of weird glitches or errors. So let's just do this, and we're almost at the end of it. So thanks again for staying and watching, man.
When we can't move, when the silence swallows you, to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain, when the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart, let your heart listen to the sound scuttling through the air. I know you feel alone in this place. The picture on the wall slowly fades away. Memories are gone forever. Silent voices weeping. Can you hear me? When we can't move, when the silence swallows you, to the fire and the rain, all the tragedy and pain, when the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, when everything around you falls apart, let your heart be unshakable. I living it out to you. Nothing could ever break us. We can make it through. I'll take away your pain. I let it go down the drain. I hope that y'all could hear me. I'm praying for a better day. Hold on. When the tears are gone, when the clouds pass by, hold your head up high. Oh, the sun will shine. When we can't move, when the silence swallows you, when all your hope is gone, you lose the strength to carry on. When the wind blows, when the world comes crashing down, just believe you'll make it through the day. Don't lose your higher soul, and don't you lose your way. When everything around you falls apart, let your heart be unshakable, be unbreakable, be unshakable.
All right, sweet. Okay, cool. I'm pretty happy with what I have as the first time pass through the as a first mix through. But very often, in the mixing process, we'll let the mix sit a little while, maybe overnight. I'll maybe come in again the next day and take a listen to it again. Bring it back home, listening on different speakers, different places. Check on different places, and then come back and making a little bit more few tweaks. So that pretty much sums up what I've got to share with you guys, man. Thanks again for staying all this while. I know it's a long time to sit. We're almost coming up to like 3.5 hours already. All right. I would love to really do this kind of live stream and sharing sessions with you. I do apologize if there's any shortcomings. Okay. Please. This first live stream I'm doing, it's for charity purposes. So what you can do, all the proceeds that if you want to contribute, all right, is gonna go again to charities in both Malaysia and also in the Philippines. So in Malaysia, again, we're going to Puak Payung, which is an NGO that works with young children, and they're helping out a lot of the underprivileged and the families which need help in terms of like food and food assistance here in Malaysia. And in Philippines, Slapshock also are also working on their own initiatives. One of the initiatives they're doing is that they're getting a trying to use some of the funds to get about 1,000 plus pieces of face masks to people that need it out there. Okay, so go to patreon.com/studio2105. Right, I'm going to leave all the details down in the description below. Okay, so if you have any further comments, right, any kind of suggestions, maybe where you feel that it could improve, what you liked about it, what you hated about this about this live stream, leave it in the comments below. If you have questions, what you like to see maybe in the future for future videos, just leave it down in the comments below as well, man. And I can't believe I'm doing this, right? But thank you again for watching. Really thank you and appreciate you spending the time together with me. Okay, hopefully when this whole thing is over, we can see each other face to face. We can hang out again in the studio. We can hang out again and be recording music and chilling out together, in person instead of doing this. All right. So, as I said, do please leave a like, right, if you enjoyed this video. All right. Again, question and comments down there. Um, appreciate it if you can become a patron and help support this channel. And of course, subscribe to it. Share it with your friends to be informed and updated on future videos. Okay. So thank you again, guys. I'll see you next time. Take care. Stay safe. Stay socially distanced, socially isolated, and wash your hands and take care of personal hygiene. Okay. See you next time in the next video. Cheers and good night, guys. Bye.